Hello there and welcome to the Bitcoin Takeover podcast. This is season 16, episode 27. This episode is sponsored by Sideshift, Citrea, Bitcoin.com News, Layer 2 Labs, Nuances.com, and Huddling.ch. And did I mention Sideshift? I think I mentioned Sideshift. And we are live with David Seroy, who is doing everything non-technical at Alpen Labs. If you haven't heard of Alpen Labs, it means you haven't listened to the previous episodes, which I have done with Liam Egan and also with John Light. And I'm not sure if I've had anyone else from your team. But it's interesting how we're seeing this renaissance of trying to use Bitcoin as money in a time when even the president of the United States is telling you to never sell your Bitcoin. It's good to have you, David. Let's rock.
Thanks, Vlad. I'm stoked to be here. I'm excited, but also kind of like, dang, am I not getting one of the 8-hour episodes like Amir and Paul Storks?
Oh, we can aim for that. Definitely. I've just had lunch. I think I'm good to go.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to get into it.
So tell me more about Alpen. Let's start with that.
Sure. I mean, I think we're mostly known for pioneering the concept of ZK Rollups on top of Bitcoin. Nowadays, I feel like that's not this novel of a concept. Everybody's like, I'm doing a Bitcoin side system or rollup or whatever. But years ago, it was kind of considered an impossible task. And then there were really a few researchers, John Light in particular, who published a paper showing like, whoa, you could actually do this. And then shortly after that, the four co-founders at Alpen, who are all from MIT, and they're actually all from Nepal, and they went to MIT, and MIT takes in like one person from Nepal per year. So they have like a monopoly on, Nepalese MIT people. But they wrote like a detailed kind of paper building on John's work about how you can build these ZK rollups on Bitcoin. That was kind of like the foundational work for everything that's happening now. And then, inscriptions came out, and then Robin Linus said, hey, you can hack in a ZK verifier. And then it was kind of the culmination of Alpen's initial research with kind of Robin cracking open BitVM to now, hey, we could actually build, these quasi ZK rollups on Bitcoin.
Yeah, but what's up with the names, right? You have... So for a while, when Lightning was the thing, you had companies naming themselves every synonym for Lightning and Bolt and whatever, in all of the languages possible. And now we have ZK Rollups, and they're called Alpen, which I guess stands for Alps or something and refers to mountains. And you have Citrea, which is about lemons and oranges. And I'm like, why? Well, what's happening with the names?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know. The Alpen name was a little bit before my time. It actually, if you rearrange the letters, it spells Nepal. The founders say that they didn't even think of that, but it seems like too odd of a coincidence. And then, just being from Nepal, you have Everest out there. It's a very mountainous terrain. I think it feels strong. And then Citrea, I think because those guys are from Turkey, I think Citrea actually translates to like orange, and Bitcoin is orange. So yeah. Naming is not easy. It's easier to build the tech than to name something.
I remember reading the work of John Light, which was mostly about sovereign rollups. This is something that he came up with, if I'm not mistaken. It was a research which I think he said was funded by the Starkware people. I don't want to mess this up, but I think it was. And for its time, it was pretty groundbreaking. I remember hearing about it in 2023 or something. And I thought to myself, well, this is definitely something we thought we could not do on Bitcoin. And it's beautiful that someone figured out how we can have this on Bitcoin. So my question for you right now is, what are these ZK rollups for the newbies who may be just tuned in and they have no idea how these work? And what are the advantages of a ZK rollup as compared to, let's see, a sidechain?
Yeah, so for context, you're right. I think it was back in 2022. John Light received a grant from Starkware and then also the Human Rights Foundation, so like with Alex Gladstein, to write a paper about whether it's possible to build these ZK rollups. And the conclusion of that paper is we could build at a minimum this thing called a sovereign rollup, so it doesn't have the ZK component. But if we had some sort of soft fork, then we could make them we could upgrade these from the sovereign rollup to a ZK rollup. But for people that aren't aware, we've been talking about scaling Bitcoin for, I don't know, over 10 years. And one of the earliest ideas was this concept of like side chains, where you can have completely separate independent blockchains from Bitcoin, but you could bridge your BTC asset from the layer one, the Bitcoin that we know and love, into these other blockchains that could, maybe one has big blocks, maybe one's privacy oriented, like they could all have specializations. And this allows us to not change the Bitcoin layer one, but to add all this additional functionality. And that sounded like an amazing, conceptually cool idea. The problem is, in order to bridge your Bitcoin, the asset from the layer one into these different side systems, you had to use what's called like a federation, or basically a multi-sig, where, I would have to give my Bitcoin to some person or group of people like Vlad or, Liquid, and then they represent that token, not Vlad, but you would essentially have to give up your Bitcoin,
Not Liquid
custody
either.
to someone else. Yeah. But and then they would represent this token on like their side system, and that kind of defeats the entire purpose of Bitcoin, is if you're just giving up your custody, your money to other people. And then so it was many years later where the sidechains idea never really kind of took off on Bitcoin. We pursued the path of Lightning and payment channels, but in the Ethereum ecosystem, they explored these concepts of ZK Rollups, which is very, very similar to the idea of sidechains, except you don't have that trusted intermediary that is kind of responsible for bridging your Bitcoin into these other ecosystems. And frankly, like that was a really cool and powerful idea. And so now we can kind of reignite that idea, originally spurred by sidechains, which is like we can scale Bitcoin with these separate side systems that can add any sort of expressivity or custom functionality, but we can do it without a centralized intermediary in between. And that to me is like a pretty profound breakthrough.
Right, so two of my show sponsors are basically competitors to Alpen. So how would you distinguish between Alpen Labs and Citrea and Alpen Labs and Drivechains?
I'll start with Drivechains first. Paul's one of my favorite people. I think he's been like incredibly brilliant and ahead of the curve. But in Drivechains, you have these separate blockchains. But then it's more of like what's called like an economically secured bridge, where you're kind of trusting, you're giving up your custody of your Bitcoin to the miners, and then the miners are minting these kind of new BTC derivatives on these side chains. And Paul would say, yes, like the miners could in theory steal your Bitcoin. He's like, but they won't, because it's game theory and it's incentives. And I think he probably has like a lot of legitimacy to his argument. I mean, I think Drivechains is an idea that I do support, but you would prefer to have something that's more closer to what we call cryptographically secured, where you just eliminate the ability for someone to steal entirely. And that's where ZK Rollups uses fancy, math that kind of eliminates this idea where we have to like be like, all right, we trust Paul's, economic analysis is right, and the miners like won't actually steal. And so that brings us closer to what we're doing at Alpen and what Citrea is doing, which I think both of our teams would agree like are conceptually quite similar. Over time, over the years, I think you'll see some of our architecture and like our design decisions start to diverge. But from like a very simple perspective, you have Bitcoin layer one, you have some sort of like ZK verifying bridge, which is BitVM, and then you have like an EVM compatible layer two. That general stack is going to look very similar with us and Citrea. Long term, you'll probably start to see some differences though.
Yeah, I think I have this conversation. I've had it with, what's his name? I don't want to mess up his name. It was someone from Citrea. And I feel sorry for not mentioning his name right now.
Or Orkin?
No, it wasn't Orkin. I know that one. It was Talib. So Talib
yes.
from Citrea basically told me a couple of weeks ago that if you have free ZK rollups on Bitcoin, you're going to end up having another scaling debate, because they're going to put so much data in the blocks that a lot of people will be unhappy. And right now it seems like Citrea and Alpen are closest to deploying and launching this year. And if there's gonna be a third one, hopefully one that focuses on privacy, then that's pretty much the entire Bitcoin block space. It's gonna be used by ZK Rollups. And I was wondering what you think about this issue, or if you think about it at all.
Well, so the kind of family of like rollups, it can have different sets of trade-offs. Like you could have one pure rollup where you're kind of what you're alluding to. You're performing transactions on the layer 2, and then you're posting a compressed version of the data onto the Bitcoin layer 1. And if you have that, then yes, like we will start consuming a lot of block space on the Bitcoin layer 1. And because there's only, with the SegWit discount, 4 megabytes every 10 minutes, then fees on the layer 1 are going to start going up very, very high. Like that is valid. But you could also structure a rollup to where people can be performing these transactions on the layer 2, and if they're fine accepting a little bit higher trust assumptions, they can post it anywhere else. They could self-custody it like they would on Lightning. They could post their data on Ethereum. They could post it on Solana. They could post it on a federation. Like there's many different ways that you could, in theory, post this data from the layer 2 into. And so the rollups framework kind of provides these different options where it says, look, if it's cheap enough and you want the highest level of security, you can post that data onto the Bitcoin layer 1. And like this issue that Talib mentioned to you, this could push up Bitcoin layer 1 fees. But you have the optionality to use a different data solution, which can give you unlimited amounts of throughput. So it's very hard to have these discussions because it's not either or. It's not you either have a trusted Bitcoin bridge and it's cheaper, or you have a trustless bridge and it's very expensive. Like users will be able to kind of choose whatever they want here.
Right, but the people who are now arguing against upper-turn data at all, and they're into filtering, they're not gonna be happy with, I guess, what we're going to have on Bitcoin in the next 6 months or so.
Well, I think there's nuance there. One, the whole op return thing, we can go into that if you want, is different. The data that would be posted in op return is different from what we're talking about, which would be kind of like the the compressed version of the transaction data from the rollup. Now, if we ignore the op return issue for now and we just say, look, we're going to be doing these transactions on the rollup, and we're posting pretty heavy amounts of data to the Bitcoin layer 1. I would argue that those are very much monetary use cases. Like we are able to scale payments. We're able to add like non-custodial financial solutions. We're able to add, in theory, perfect privacy to payments. Like these are admirable goals that, while I have my disagreements with the kind of like Knots camp and like the anti-spam people, I would say, from my subjective point of view, this is not spam. This is scaling Bitcoin as money. So I think a lot of them, when they understand that, would actually say, okay, we're actually kind of fine with this use of the block space.
Well, I sure hope so, because this whole upper turn drama was started by a GitHub pull request that was posted by Peter Todd, and it was in favor of removing the upper turn limit entirely. And the argumentation presented was for Citrea, actually. And it's sort of funny that they found themselves in the middle of this drama, but at the same time, it seems like the conversation was not about Citrea at all. And the guys who are into running Bitcoin knots and also filtering and I guess also mining with Ocean, they haven't mentioned Citrea per se. They're just more aggressive than ever trying to filter out transactions that they don't like. And I don't know where this is gonna end, but it's definitely not the permissionless Bitcoin that I've been hearing about for many years.
Yeah, I mean, I think probably the reason they haven't gone hard into targeting the Citrea situation is because if you have a strong or even like moderate technical understanding, you'll see that what Citrea wants to do is like pretty much an absolute nothing burger. And if anything, removing the op return limit actually reduces the UTXO bloat and reduces this kind of unnecessary spam. So it's kind of like contradictory to like what Ocean's kind of mission and not says they want to do. And I think the vast majority of people that are like technically competent in Bitcoin are kind of supportive, in my opinion, of removing the op return limit. I mean, you do have people like Luke Dasher, who is like extremely technically competent, but I don't know, frankly, like at times maybe a little bit like deranged. And everyone else, kind of like understands the argument to return, like remove the op return limit. Yeah.
Yeah, on the topic of Luke and also grass-fed Bitcoin and Chris, I don't know
Guida.
what his, yeah. It's very strange because they are technically competent enough to understand what's happening, but at the same time, they're either ideologically opposed or else they have different incentives to not enable this on Bitcoin. And for a lot of people, this seems like the block size wars of their generation. You know, they haven't been around for the block size wars. They don't know what this was really like, and they're finding a cause to fight for. They're like, yeah, I'm gonna run this software, and maybe it's like UASF back in 2017. Maybe I'm protecting Bitcoin. I feel so strong and sovereign. And look, BTC Sessions just posted a new tutorial how to set up knots. I'm so smart. Oh no, these multi-million dollar companies are not gonna succeed in putting data on Bitcoin. No, keep your dick pics away from my node, you pedo or whatever. It seems like the discourse is at a very low level, even though the intentions are very technically, how should I put it, meritorious. There's a lot to it. There's a lot that can happen to Bitcoin as money. You know, it's not just putting data on Bitcoin. It's not scaling ordinals or whatever. It's enabling different use cases for borrowing your Bitcoin, for having all of these financial services that were not possible on Bitcoin before, to use Bitcoin as money. But the people who oppose them are saying that they're trying to protect Bitcoin as money. And to me, it's a very strange paradox.
Yeah, and to be clear, like if people want to run knots, like run knots, and I support their desire to kind of like promote a different implementation from core. I don't necessarily agree with their rationale, but yeah, I mean, if they want to run a different implementation and promote that to the community, and the community starts running it, I mean, that's Bitcoin. But I mostly see this as like a guerrilla marketing tactic rather than a like competent technical argument. I think while I'm sympathetic to their perspective that Bitcoin is money, I radically agree with that. I'm in this for money and not for NFTs or dick butts or like random tokens. I think that what is money is like rather a subjective point of view. Like Chris Guida in like one of his podcasts said, well, like Bitcoin is permissionless, like if the use case is something that like we as Bitcoiners agree with. And he's kind of saying, well, like, what Bitcoiners agree with is his perspective of what is money, which is just like opening and closing lightning channels. But it's like, isn't there some way for us as Bitcoiners to come into consensus as to like what we think is like a valid use of the Bitcoin blockchain? And the answer is yes. It's literally the Bitcoin consensus. And so this isn't like, what Luke and Chris Gita and Bitcoin Mechanic say is like Bitcoin is money. It's like we've already had this discussion and we've kind of agreed of what the current Bitcoin consensus is. And if you're trying to post a transaction that is within the consensus, then that is a Bitcoin use case. And I know that they would argue that the whole kind of like ordinals and inscriptions thing was like a bug and it's a hack and it wasn't actually what Bitcoiners agreed with. But the reality is like that is the current state of consensus. And if they truly want to make a change here and they say, hey, the vast majority of the Bitcoin community agrees with us, agrees with like what the knots people are saying is Bitcoin is money, then you're going to have to fork it. You're going to have to change the consensus code of Bitcoin. And so my advice to them is if they want to do that, put a fork out there. That's like a little bit of a precarious and tenuous thing to say, but that's just kind of the state of the matter right now. Like if they truly want to prevent this spam, it has to go beyond filters. Filters are only a half measure, which may have some impact, but when it comes to people that are economically motivated and say, I want to get things in that are outside of the filters and that can fit in Bitcoin consensus, people can very, very, very easily do that. So it's a much deeper issue than what the knots people are saying. And that's ultimately why I just think a lot of this is like guerrilla marketing tactics.
Yeah, but at the same time, you have to think about it in this way. If you filter out ordinal inscriptions, which is arguably the most efficient way to put data into Bitcoin, you're going to be able to put data using multi-sigs or stamps or BRC20s or ways which are not on the witness side, so you cannot prune them, which bloat the UTXO set and which can be very easily, how should I put it, lost in a crowd. So you can't necessarily tell if that's a legit multi-sig or that's actually data that's coming to the Bitcoin blockchain. So they can fork away, they can create their own version of Bitcoin, but it doesn't mean that they will not enable any sort of data to get inserted into the Bitcoin blocks. And also, transaction data is data. And these are transactions that pay transaction fees to the miners. And proof of work was created as a way to prevent spam by paying for the spam. So you can argue that as long as you pay for it, it's not spam. And that's the filter in and of itself.
Yeah, exactly. I'm in total agreement with you. Yeah, to your point, it'd be like cat and mouse game, but ultimately, like, people can just tweak the UTXOs, embed data arbitrarily in there. And the people like Greg Maxwell and Peter Willey, like these OG respected Bitcoin developers, have posted them out like as much as this is, and even Polstra have all said, look, like, in order to actually make this effective, you would have to like radically reform and strip out Bitcoin. Like it wouldn't even be Bitcoin. It's not just a simple, change we can do here, and then it's like, oh, like we can eliminate all this spam. It's yeah. It's pretty deeply embedded in Bitcoin. Its ability to, like, for people to start posting data in kind of spam ways.
Well, they're smart because they remember colored coins, which arguably were very much similar with ordinal inscriptions. They remember Counterparty, they remember Mastercoin/Omni, which was a big deal for its time. That's how Tether came out on the Bitcoin blockchain. So they do know that you can create random tokens on Bitcoin by inserting data. And what it takes is just some third-party computer to interpret this data in a certain way. And that's how you get basically another layer to Bitcoin. And UTXOs get a whole new meaning, of which the miners are not even aware, or the nodes. So you can play this game for as long as you want. You're just gonna name certain UTXOs something and then create a protocol on top of it which recognizes that identity. And that's it. You have a new layer for Bitcoin which does something that you don't like.
Yeah, I'm in total agreement. I'm starting to get to the point where I'm getting like past the conversation. I'm not ready to move on to other things in Bitcoin, to continue actually scaling and building out and not getting caught in these, like, petty marketing dramas, in my opinion.
Now, you mentioned something about deploying Alpen as a multi-sig, because there is no mechanism to do it without any sort of trust assumptions involved. And that would require, I guess, a Covenant soft fork. And I want to ask you, which are the Covenant soft forks that Alpen Labs advocates for, and what would help you basically to deploy a much better and more efficient layer for financial services on Bitcoin?
Well, to be clear, we're not deploying with any sort of like multi-sig or trusted multi-sig. Like, the whole breakthrough of this BitVM setup is you can create this bridge that has a one event trust assumption, or as long as like one person or one party is honest, then this kind of bridge is secure. So we would not go to mainnet or put a product live in production that doesn't at least meet those criteria. In terms of soft forks, like, we don't need any sort of soft fork whatsoever, but it could make what we're building more efficient or cleaner. So I think at a minimum, something like CTV and CheckSig from Stack, which is gaining some traction, would be very beneficial. I think CTV is kind of being recognized, like, while it is very simplistic, it's kind of like I think James O'Byrne calls it like elemental, in a sense, where it seems to be at least somewhat beneficial to everyone in some small capacity, with like minimal risk. CheckSig from Stack would be very beneficial for BitVM based bridges. Right now, in order to like create a BitVM style bridge, you have to do these things that were formerly called Lamport signatures. Now they're called Winternet signatures. The bottom line is, like, you kind of have this signature scheme that is a little bit clunky. It's like very data intensive, or like it requires like a lot of off-chain communication. And if we had CheckSig from Stack, you could probably reduce that by 10x. So for many of us in the BitVM world, we say, okay, great, CTV would be beneficial if we had check sig from stack. Also, that probably makes the BitVM style bridges, 10x better. But even then, BitVM, the best you can get is this like one event trust assumption that I mentioned. That is, it's not perfectly cryptographically trustless to be able to bridge your Bitcoin into these side chains or ZK rollups, but it's pretty dang close. Now, if we took it one step up on soft forks, having something like OpCat, you could create. This is what Starkware guys like Ali Ben Sasson and all of them want. Is you can create something called like a Stark verifier, which is like STARK. And that would remove BitVM entirely, and it would remove this kind of one event trust assumption, and you can have a true like trustless ZK verifier. Like we can have this trustless, no one event trust assumption bridge. So we'd also be supportive of CAT. And then I think Liam, who's our founding cryptographer / chief scientist, who you've had on here previously, he simply just wants like multiplication. Like right now, you can't even do multiplication in Bitcoin script. Simply like adding that functionality would be a pretty like material breakthrough for what's possible on like the ZK side of Bitcoin, because verifying zero knowledge proofs in Bitcoin, or verifying zero knowledge proofs in general, very simply, it's just like performing multiplications, many multiplications, but that's like the core primitive. Right now in Bitcoin script, like to try to do multiplication, it's like you have to like hack together like addition, op-add, like a bunch of crazy stuff. So simply just saying, hey, we can like multiply two really big numbers together, that would be pretty significant breakthrough. So just to recap, CTV, CSFS, check sig from stack, we'd be happy with OpCat, and then we'd also be happy with like op multiply.
It's sort of ironic how CTV started out as this proposal that came out right after Taproot. I think less than a year later, Jeremy was pushing for activation. And then he hit the ceiling and he got a lot of hate, and he went through this process where he felt like it makes no sense to continue working on this anymore, and there's no support for it. And you had Ellen Hans, and you had a lot of... Sorry, I knocked something on my desk. You had a lot of proposals that seemed to be more powerful than CTV. And then it came back full circle, and now we all agree that, okay, CTV might just be the best option of them all. They were saying, well, it's non-recursive, and it cannot do this, and it cannot do that. Maybe we should think of something that helps Lightning also. Maybe we should get together at a conference and say, well, let's package these opcodes and call it the Great Script Restoration, as Blockstream did. But right now, there seems to be a lot of consensus for CTV, whereas last year, I think it was for OpCat.
Yeah, I think I don't love in Bitcoin that like just how like radically strong people are opposed to like any sort of new change whatsoever. I do think that overtime window shifting. I think it was really unfortunate that Jeremy was almost like a sacrificial lamb, where it's like we have to make this guy's life miserable and make him feel like he's trying to steal the identity of Bitcoin. But then somebody else like picks up his proposal, and as long as it's not like Jeremy pushing it, also it's like, oh, this is actually like kind of interesting. So I don't know. I mean, Jeremy's like crazy brilliant. He's been extremely beneficial to Bitcoin, but whatever. Like if we end up getting CTV and check sig from stack, despite how long it's taken and like all the hurdles, I think that would be great. With regards to like OpCat, I don't know if it was ever it just opens up too many like potential trapdoors for a lot of people, in particular like MEV. I don't think that there's any credibility to the MEV argument, but I think that's the main barrier. People are like, we just don't even know how to like think about this, and so therefore like we're just gonna push OpCat off to the side. And just so people like are aware, MEV is this idea of like either minor extractable value or maximal extractable value. It's basically like if you added some sort of programmability to Bitcoin with like a software where you could build these like AMMs or these kind of like trading platforms, or just like ways to introduce tokens like more broadly on Bitcoin, then certain miners could run like these quantitative strategies in extraction. They could reorder transactions in a certain way so that, they essentially extract like more value than they should have from people. And so then maybe you have an entity like, Marathon, who they have some secret MEV strategy where they can double the amount of revenue they're making as mining versus like, some individual miner in Africa, like they don't have the resources to do this quantitative trading analysis. And all of a sudden, because Marathon or whichever entity is making more revenue from MEV, then they can expand their mining operations and it can centralize. So like MEV really is like a very, very, very dangerous and like very, very scary thing for the decentralization of Bitcoin. And some people suspect that you could, in theory, introduce MEV with OpCat. I think there's a couple of reasons to believe it would not actually do that. In particular, if you tried to build things like AMMs or DEXs or MEV strategies on Bitcoin layer 1, they would never actually be able to gain much scale because we have the 10-minute block times and the limit on block space and just like everything else about it. Like these things, you wouldn't be able to generate like things at scale enough for MEV to be impactful, in my humble opinion. And then even if CAT enabled things like a trustless ZK verifier for us on the rollup side, it's kind of been shown in the Ethereum ecosystem that all of the MEV gets captured essentially on the layer 2, and it doesn't bleed down into the L1. So the miners wouldn't capture it, therefore they wouldn't kind of be susceptible to this centralization risk, and therefore CAT, in my opinion, probably feels safe. But just given that we have check template verify, CTV, and check sig from Stack, it feels like that's where people are leaning rather than like taking the risk with CAT.
Yeah, so for people who are unaware, OpCat is basically an operation code for concatenation, which means you take two different pieces of data and you put them together. It's something that you cannot do currently in Bitcoin without a lot of code. As you said, you do a lot of additions to basically make up for the lack of multiplication. The concern, I think, is that you can generate these loops or you can write very inefficient code, which basically is very hard to read. You can concatenate a lot of elements and then you're looking at it and you're not even sure what the code does. But for these concerns, I tell people, well, there's OpCat on Liquid, and if you don't like Blockstream, maybe you like Bitcoin Cash because they also have OpCat. And if you don't like Bitcoin Cash, maybe it's time that you destroy it, right? If you're so concerned that OpCat is gonna destroy Bitcoin, why don't you destroy Bitcoin Cash? It has large block size, it has OpCat. Try it. Try to destroy Bitcoin Cash if OpCat is so harmful.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that sentiment. People like the Starkware team, to their credit, they put out a $1 million grant. They said, hey, yes, we would love to see OpCat, but here's $1 million if you can kind of propose these ways of how you could, break Bitcoin with OpCat, or even just like put it in a precarious situation where it messes up the incentives. So yeah, I mean, I think the window to collect that 1 million is over. But hey, if somebody has a suggestion, like I'm happy to, go to the Starkware team and be like, open this back up, let's do $1 million. Like somebody has a really compelling way of how to, break it. So I tend to agree with your sentiment. Like there's a lot more complaining and fear mongering about it than there is actual evidence that this stuff would be dangerous.
Well, but it has to be a conspiracy, right? Because nobody wants to destroy Bitcoin Cash. That's the attack on Bitcoin, and they're waiting for the real thing to get deployed on the real Bitcoin, which is gonna basically, how should I put it, make everyone's generational wealth vanish overnight. And that's why you should activate OpCat. But I was gonna ask you, why don't you guys build on Bitcoin Cash? Like, is there a stigma that's associated with it? It can be a very good way to prove how the technology works.
Well, I mean, we can now build what we want to do on Bitcoin. Like maybe a couple of years ago, that would have been like a decently compelling argument where it's like we didn't have things like inscriptions, we didn't have BitVM, like we literally just like couldn't do it. And so maybe it makes sense to say let's show we can do this on Bitcoin Cash, and then we pitch it to the Bitcoin community. But now it's like we don't need to ask for permission. Like we have everything we need to build. Would it be beneficial if we had more soft forks and it makes the process like more efficient and cleaner? Yes, 100%. But like we're chilling, like we're doing the research, we're engineering, we're moving forward with Bitcoin. So there's really no need to to do it on these other kind of Bitcoin forks. And also like I mean, I don't want to speak for any teams, but people are kind of embracing and like aligning around orange coin good. Like even historical, I think Bitcoin Cash advocates are, maybe moving more towards orange coin rather than green coin. I think like we're kind of past the whatever it's called, event horizon, or we're at escape velocity with Bitcoin.
Well, yeah, but at the same time, it's open source software. So rather than running on testnets, which are limited and have no normie users and also no incentives to break, you can try to break one of these altcoins, altchains that have been around for a long time. They have all the tools that you need. And who knows, maybe you're going to make money breaking them.
Maybe. Yeah, I guess it's worth consideration. It just hasn't been a priority for us. We're aligned on Bitcoin, and that's just like where we started building everything.
Anyway, it's been about 36 minutes into this interview, and we haven't mentioned the price at all. And we are at an all-time high of $109,000. And let me plug a couple of sponsors. I've been telling people for the past few months that if someone wants to pay you in stablecoins, you should not hold on to that and swap that for Bitcoin. And if you did that, I guess today you would be very happy. So check out SideShift. That's where you can do this. You basically paste your Bitcoin address in there, and then you have a USDT address that you can copy. You send that to the partner that wants to pay you in some stablecoin. They're gonna pay that to you, but what you get to your wallet is BTC. And of course, there is a small fee involved, and yeah, it's pretty cool. Try it out. It doesn't require registration. It's fast. I've used it before, and I would not recommend it if I didn't like it myself. And also check out Bitcoin.com news on the topic of Bitcoin Cash, because for a long time, and I guess it's been like 7 or 8 years, they have been the hub for BCH stuff. And now they rebranded completely. If you look at their website, they know which is the real Bitcoin. They have some solid journalism there. You can find some geopolitics and some gold news and some Bitcoin news. And it's honestly, in some ways, more useful to me than Bitcoin Magazine, which seems to be way too political and way too Trump-leaning. It's a bit more balanced, and I like it. So if you get the chance, go to news.bitcoin.com, and I think they're doing a pretty good news. And I think I've already mentioned Citrea and Layer 2 Labs, but I want to give them another shout out because their software is available for testing today. So if you go to layer2labs.com/download, you're going to find versions for all the Drivechains, and then you go to Drivechain Talk, which is their Telegram channel. And there are some guys there who can send you some free testnet coins so that you can make transactions around. Try that Zcast sidechain, or try to do your own ICO on this fork of Ethereum. It's interesting. And also for Citrea, it's citrea.xyz, and they have a download section that gets you to their testnet version of the software. Does Alpen have any testnet version that can be tried today?
Yeah, we're on a private devnet right now. Hopefully we'll probably be having our public testnet in the next, few weeks or month here, just kind of whenever we push go on the button. But you can either hit me up if you want to see the documentation, or just wait a couple more weeks or whatever until we make the formal announcement. And then I don't know. Fun fact: you mentioned Bitcoin.com. Our head of marketing is Andrew. He was the former CMO of Bitcoin.com, and he was the guy that came up with the green Bitcoin logo. So that's his claim to fame. But yeah, I mean, I do. That was kind of what actually an example I was alluding to, where Bitcoin.com, they're kind of aligning. They're coming back. They're saying, hey, orange coin good. I don't think they are like disavowing Bcash or Bitcoin Cash by any means. But yeah, I think people are just kind of like embracing Bitcoin as a whole, and we're seeing that trend play out.
If you go to bitcoin.com today, you're going to see that they're orange. They're not green anymore.
Exactly.
They have a different logo. They have a different layout. It's very orange all around. It's not green. But yeah, I think it's a historical contribution, the fact that he made the green logo, which for a long time has been such a massive trigger within the BTC community, just seeing that. Or the
Exactly.
BCH please t-shirts. Like those were fun times.
It's absolutely part of Bitcoin lore, definitively.
So I was gonna ask you technically, what are the differences between Citrea and Alpen Labs? Because you're building a ZK rollup which you tries to build some of the same services and uses some of the same assumptions.
I think for what we've kind of announced publicly, I think these things are going to look very similar. I'll give some alpha leaks here, whether I should or should not, but I think eventually these teams are all going to want to expand beyond the EVM, and you're going to want to offer the ability to maybe have an SVM, maybe to have shielded CSV, maybe to have whatever Zcash style or Monero style, or something that's custom built for trading. Like you're going to want all of these different what we call like custom execution domains, and you're going to want all of these to interoperate with each other. And I think the way that we're kind of architecting that from the ground up, a little bit more from scratch, probably varies from what Citrea is doing. So I think if and when everybody expands to this multi-execution domain, like beyond the EVM, I think that's when our architecture will start to look a little bit different than what they're doing. And then, right now, everybody is kind of aligning on like the same BitVM type setup. I think that there is some very novel research that, like research, it could literally fall apart tomorrow and we hit a blocker and we say, well, we missed this part, it's a nothing burger. But there is, some research that we're pursuing that could be a 100 to 1,000x improvement to the current state of the art of BitVM. And if that becomes viable, then I think you really start to see these bridges diverge. So those are kind of two conceptual or two things that maybe you could start to see a difference from. Aside from that, I think a lot of it will come down to the ecosystem and the partners. It's one thing to have an EVM compatible layer, but it's all right. Who's your lending market? Who's your DEX market? Do you have Bitcoin backed stable coins? Like, do you actually have distribution? The technical stack only gets you so far.
Okay, so who is behind Alpen Labs? Because in the case of Citrea, they came up with all of these conspiracy theories saying, well, the same guys who tried to destroy Bitcoin in 2017 are now paying for Citrea to get built. No, this is another attack on Bitcoin. What kind of attack is Alpen launching?
Oh, God, you're asking like who are our backers?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's all public. Ribbit, who I think is like maybe the like single most successful like fintech investor in the world, is kind of our lead investor. So we also have Nick, My Star is Rising Carter with Castle Island, who's backed us. In terms of like seed investors or angel investors, we have like Wences Casares, who maybe the single largest Bitcoin holder aside from Satoshi on the planet, who are like patient zero in Silicon Valley. I don't think he's made any Bitcoin investments in like over 8 years. So we're really stoked to have Wences. And then, unlike people may not know these names, but like in Ethereum, there are some like major researchers like Uma Roy from Succinct, who's kind of like at the bleeding edge of ZK. She's like the founder and CEO of Succinct Labs. John Adler from Celestia, who invented the concept of optimistic rollups and like data availability. We have like Hasu, who's like a pretty prolific researcher. We have the family office of Lido, which is like the single biggest application on Ethereum with like staked ETH. So and then I'll add one more, like Neha Narula, who and Jeremy Rubin. Jeremy's an angel, I think I can say that. These are people who like founded MIT DCI, like Digital Currency Initiative. So yeah, I mean, I think we have like pretty respected investors. I'm sure somebody on Twitter will find something wrong with all of those people and say how they're an attack on Bitcoin. But yeah, they're pretty legit, I think.
Jessica, hello. I would actually love to have Nick Carter on the show. If you can connect me with him, that can be fun. I was the first
Nick.
guy who high-fived him before his fight. Okay, I was there next to the stage. I extended my arm. He high-fived me. He was so pumped, so hyped, and then went on to kick that guy's ass. And I was like, yeah, I feel like I was part of it.
That's awesome. I was actually at that event as well, and I talked to Nick about that fight on like my little Stratacast, like on the small podcast that we do, and I thought it was an awesome moment. I loved his follow up post about like his white pill moment, and he was kind of diagnosed with I think some sort of disease, and maybe it was like an autoimmune condition, and then he's like, hey, I'm a Twitter personality and a Bitcoin guy, but like why not? Like why can't he just like go out and train and get fit and like go inside the ring and just like feel a little bit of a like primordial sense of fighting. Like you don't have to do this at a UFC, a professional level. And I'm just like, hell yeah, Nick, that was cool. So I'm stoked for him.
But he still hasn't had the original opponent, which was supposed to be David, what's his last name? Hoffman?
That's right.
The guy from the Bankless podcast who broke his ribs or something just before the fight. So
Yeah,
it
yeah.
wasn't what we wanted. It was like, the Nick Carter fight we have at home, not the one that we want.
Yeah, I'm actually buddies with Hoffman as well. But he had a fight recently against somebody named Kane Warwick, who's like runs another application on Ethereum, and Hoffman won that fight. So I would love to see the Nick and David Hoffman fight happen, and it'll be like the battle for the flippening for Bitcoin versus Ethereum.
Yeah, what's up with fights, by the way? I've seen BitBoy going into fights. I've seen all of these podcasters realizing, okay, I look like a sissy or something, sitting here all day talking to people, just being on the internet. I gotta show them that I'm a real man or whatever. And what does that mean? Well, I'm gonna train for 6 months, get ripped, and then get inside the ring and make people money because they're betting on my fight. I don't know. It's very strange to me. And uh, when I was there, I was even considering it, but I think right now I'm a heavyweight, and there's no way I would be paired with Nick Carter or whatever.
Well, I think the rules are probably flexible, and since these aren't like exactly sanctioned fights.
I'm six
But
four, 200 pounds. I don't think I would get
yeah,
paired.
yeah,
It's not fair.
yeah, you're probably right. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I go back and forth. Some of the fights I see or I hear about on Twitter, I'm like, this is just like so cringe and like so embarrassing. Like some of the Bit Boy stuff. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe because it's some of my buddies, like with Nick and Hoffman, I'm like, I just think that stuff's a little cooler. Like they're just doing it with the acknowledgement that like it's not serious for them. Like they're not trying to become fighters. It's just I don't know, something personal for them to do. Yeah,
And there's
that's all I
that
have to say about it.
company Karate Combat, and they're monetizing this. Just all sorts of celebrities getting into the ring to see who wins a fight. Like it's so stupid, but it works for them.
Yeah, yeah. I'm more on the like I went to the permissionless, and they had like a betting market set up for a pickleball tournament, and we took that down and we took first place in the pickleball tournament. So that's the extent of my athletic endeavors in crypto conferences. I don't think I'll be entering the ring.
I mean, why would you kill your brain cells and potentially not have children just because you want to flex on some random people on the internet who are making money off of your fight? It's silly.
It's a good point. The trade-offs.
I don't know. I don't feel like I have that much to prove to get into a ring and fight someone that I don't even hate. Like, if I got to fight, let me think of someone I actually hate. Giacomo Zucca, I would destroy that guy.
Well, he's not getting put in your weight class. I think you have a probably a full foot advantage. Giacomo's closer to my height. Sword
Yeah, I
Kings.
know. I met him. But just for the lulz, that would be epic. Anyway, let's go back to Alpen Labs and
Mhm.
talking about technology because that's why we're here. You mentioned Ethereum a few times, like some backers of Alpen Labs are into Ethereum and have built stuff on Ethereum. The question is, and a lot of the filterers would say this, are you trying to bring Ethereum to Bitcoin? Are you trying to turn Bitcoin into Ethereum? Is Bitcoin just a data availability layer for Ethereum stuff?
No. I mean, I think the vast majority of things on Ethereum, really have no benefit to Bitcoin as money, and really don't have much product market fit aside from issuing tokens. I think a lot of the major loud critics, I think they have validity to that argument, but there is a subset of things on Ethereum which have true real deal product market fit, and are kind of an extension of Bitcoin as money. One of them, in my opinion, is some things like DeFi in particular, just simply being able to borrow against your Bitcoin. Right now, most Bitcoiners are telling us, hey, go put your money in, I don't know, whatever, name your favorite application. I don't want to throw names out there, and, pay 12, 13, 14, 15% plus annual renewal fees and origination fees and administrative fees and KYC. And now we have Jack Mallers with Strike, and he's like, we can maybe get, it at 10%, best case scenario, 50% LTV. And it's well, no, you could just go to Morpho and borrow at 4.5% without any of the other hassle instantly. These are products that were built on Ethereum rails with DeFi that are truly significantly better than what the kind of Bitcoin alternatives are, and they're non-custodial. So those are the types of things where I'm even that one single use case is well worth us bringing Ethereum type use cases to Bitcoin. Aside from that, are things like privacy. I don't know, something like Zcash or Monero. I would love to see that for Bitcoin. Our head of research, Aaron, he was a co-author on ring signatures, which are used in Monero. Liam, who you've had on here, was a co-author on shielded CSV, which in my opinion is probably the current state of the art of bringing perfectly private payments to Bitcoin. Was that stuff born in Ethereum? I mean, ZK was funded mostly by Ethereum research. So if people are going to push back on me and say, oh, you're bringing Ethereum stuff to Bitcoin, I'm yeah. So what? So there's some really horrendously bad things in Ethereum, but there's also some god tier good things that Ethereum has brought. And I think for us at Alpen, we're more focused on obviously the things that benefit Bitcoin is money, and things that can be done non-custodially and without token incentives. The reality is if you want to bring that stuff, you in theory open up the door for some of it to exist on the Rollup.
Yeah, agreed. But there's a lot of nuance here that most people fail to grasp. They don't understand that Ethereum has built something that might be interesting for Bitcoin. I had Vitalik on 3 or 4 episodes ago, and he agreed to a degree that Ethereum is sort of like a sidechain for Bitcoin. Because right now, the most liquid layer 2 for Bitcoin is actually Ethereum with wrapped Bitcoin. There's 100,000 BTC in there. And I think both Seroy and Alpen are trying to tap into that to minimize the amount of BTC that is exposed to this counterparty risk, and bring that to a layer which has the same security assumptions as Bitcoin. Am I correct in this?
Yeah, exactly. And one, I really enjoyed the Vitalik episode, and that was an awesome poll for you. I think you've had some really good guests over the past 12 months. But for now, Ethereum is kind of a side chain for Bitcoin. However, most people don't they think that, oh wow, we're going to have these BitVM style bridges, and we'll be able to bridge Bitcoin to Ethereum in this near trustless manner. And that is not the case. If you're bridging from the Bitcoin consensus layer into a different consensus system like Ethereum, there is no amount of ZK, cryptography, BitVM that can ever fully eliminate the trust assumptions. There's a hard line when you're going between different consensus systems. So for now, Vitalik is probably right that Ethereum is a side system to Bitcoin, and we have WBTC and CBBTC over there. But kind of what ourselves and Seroy are building is a Rollup is a separate blockchain, but it inherits the consensus of Bitcoin. So as I kind of that line that you have here where you try to bridge over Ethereum, that's going to be a trust assumption no matter what. With a Rollup, you can essentially eliminate that more fully. And I think once this stuff comes to market, then we're really going to siphon back a lot of the Bitcoin that has been bridged over to Ethereum, and it's going to come, yes, closer to these kind of Bitcoin security and Bitcoin trust assumptions. And that is, I think, closer to the holy grail that we want for scaling.
Yeah, but once again, you gotta grasp the nuance. And you said something nice about my podcast. I also have to say something nice about your podcast, which is the Stratacast. It's pretty good. You have most of the investors and contributors to Alpen Labs. So, to anyone who's trying to learn more about Alpen Labs than this podcast episode is going to teach you, go to David Seroy's podcast, which is called Stratacast. It's really good. I've been listening to bits of it. I didn't have time for entire episodes, but it's very informative. And yeah, you're doing a great job. I hope you keep going.
Yeah, thank you. There are, like I joked with you earlier, dozens of us that listen. So hopefully we can pump those numbers up and I can get some more episodes out.
No, but it's really good because I remember at one point Stefan Livera was arguing that there are too many Bitcoin podcasts. And I disagree in the sense that I think we should have more Bitcoin podcasts, but focused on very niche topics. Because everyone's trying to be Joe Rogan. Everyone's trying to be like Peter McCormack or something. Just interview people from all across the ecosystem and know nothing about the topics and just get famous because of it. But we have a lot of competent speakers who are specialized in some topics. Maybe they don't know a lot about the others, but they just need to send that extra piece of information in a way that's easy to digest to the listeners. And I've been chasing this concept. I've been trying to get as many Bitcoin layer 2 people as I can. I've been trying to unite tribes. I even got a BSV guy to try to see what's up, where they're currently at. But my point is that there should be more of these podcasts focusing on specifics as opposed to just, hey, this is sound money, we're winning, we're so rich, I'm gonna buy a Citadel with 1 BTC in 10 years, or why should I spend my Bitcoin today when I can buy a private jet in 20 years? I don't know. It's weird to me. We have too much of that and not enough actually useful conversations.
Yeah, I'm 100% in alignment with you there. And I was like very cringe and like resistant to starting a podcast for those reasons. I was like, we don't need any more Bitcoin podcasts. But I agree with you. It's like we don't need any more of the kind of like number go up, moon juice, stock to flow, podcasts. Like, let's get back to these cypherpunk ideals, to scaling Bitcoin, to like these open conversations. And yeah, like we were talking about price earlier, and you said, hey, like we have an all-time high. I'm like, I honestly didn't even know and until my dad, texted me. I'm just not focused on that anymore. Like I got into Bitcoin, yeah, sure, for like number go up, a financial economic incentive, but there's so many way cooler things that are happening in Bitcoin. And I think most people in their Bitcoin journey, they actually become a little bit numb to number go up, and they're like, wait, like why am I in this again? Like I've become wealthy. I've gone through these cycles. Like my bank account has gone up, and like I think they actually feel a little bit of burnout and existential dread, and being like, damn, I told myself I was like into this Bitcoin because it's separation of money and state, but they actually only cared about number go up. And then once number had gone up, they have like a little bit of identity crisis. And I think that's why you see people actually like leave and disappear from Bitcoin. Is I think that there's like a moment of introspection where they're kind of like, fuck, like why am I in this? And I think what I love with what you're doing and what we're doing at Alpen is like, it kind of like reignites this why. It's like, oh, hell yeah, we can separate money from state. We can actually create these non-custodial solutions. We can add like world-class privacy. We can build better financial solutions than what these centralized providers are applying. Like that's what gets me up in the morning. Like I don't go and check coin market cap every day and look at Eric Wall's rainbow chart and like all of these like MicroStrategy shills. I understand that's a part of Bitcoin, and it's like cool, totally, but acknowledge there's some other really badass stuff happening here.
So did you just acknowledge that you don't have any MSTR stocks in your portfolio and you missed out on the gains that you could have had?
Yes.
That's horrible, man. Like, are you even a Bitcoiner if you don't have a stock portfolio related to MicroStrategy?
Yes, I know it's sacrilegious, but it is a sacrifice I was willing to make.
Like, do you make payments with Bitcoin, or are you like Jimmy Song and Tone Vase and Samson Mao and all of these reputed and serious Bitcoiners who are paying with their credit cards to get points? And they're saving their Bitcoin because that's why Bitcoin was invented.
Yeah, I mean, I have mixed views on this. I mean, yeah, like I have Lightning wallets. I love going to conferences and things that support, Bitcoin for payments, and I will use it there. But I'm also sympathetic to the idea of like, use Bitcoin as a store of value, borrow against it. And I mean, that is part of the reason why I mentioned things like Morpho and these DeFi solutions. Like I see stablecoins as actually kind of like a bridge to hyper Bitcoinization. Like I think it is. I see both sides. Like I would love to use Bitcoin as like medium of exchange and payments, but I also don't fault people if they say, I like using this as a store of value. I want to borrow dollars against it until we get to, you know, maybe a hyper Bitcoinized world and use those. And so that's also why I'm big into Bitcoin backed stablecoins and, you know, flying around censorship resistant stablecoins on like, you know, perfect privacy networks. So I think there's a balance there.
Yes, but at the same time, you're not increasing the demand for freedom money. You're just enabling the US dollar to be transacted with the technology that we built for Bitcoin. And I remember the counter argument for this. It was from Rosello Lopez, who is one of the main people at Tether. I had him on my show last year. And he was saying, well, every time you look at USDT and you see the T in it, just remember it stands for Trojan horse. And once we get everyone onboarded with this, they're going to discover Bitcoin. But I'm not sold on the concept. I think that in order for a currency to actually work as money, to be a real currency, you need to have proper demand for it. And if the demand is only speculative as opposed to rooted in utility, we're sort of losing the battle. And what we've seen, and we spend a lot of time talking about Bitcoin and thinking of ways to improve it, but Monero has gotten bigger over the last couple of years, and it's used for payments in many more places. Litecoin is the #1 most used currency on BitPay. BitPay, which was built for enabling you to pay with Bitcoin. And then you see all of these oddities where Lightning is not even 1% or something of transactions on Bitrefill, even though they invested a lot of money in it. And okay, not 1%, maybe it's 10%, but it's still underwhelming compared to the expectations. And you get all of these virtue signaling, happy-go-lucky guys who go to conferences and they say, I'm gonna pay with my wallet of Satoshi or my Phoenix wallet or whatever, and this is how we build a parallel economy. But it's super delusional because they are in a small bubble and the outside world doesn't care about this. And there are certain altcoins that have gained a lot of traction over the years. And I think the biggest threat right now to Bitcoin adoption is actually USDT, because people are willing to pay $3 to $5 fees on Tron today. Right now, you can look it up, what the Tron fees are for sending USDT. But Bitcoin, I think the mempool was pretty empty when I looked at it earlier today. And this is sort of an existential threat to the network.
Well, I think you only have legitimacy to your claim if the stablecoins that people are transacting are backed by treasuries. But if people want to use stablecoins, and these are Bitcoin backed stablecoins, then all of the demand to hold the Bitcoin backed stablecoins is directly channeled into Bitcoin. So yeah, I think that's an important nuance here. Like if we just have, you know, Bitcoin as this like store of value, but everybody's still using Tether, which is kind of the state of the market right now, then yes, every single dollar that gets minted into Tether, that directly allows the government to perpetuate this fiat debt game and to kind of like assert their control over the monetary system. While I do think Tether is a great company and they're very Bitcoin aligned, like with 100% certainty, every dollar that goes into Tether 100% supports the fiat game. But if we had some credible way to create Bitcoin backed stablecoins, then I kind of like disagree with you entirely, because anybody that desires that Bitcoin backed stablecoin directly corresponds to increasing the demand for Bitcoin. And that's a happy medium for us to kind of like acknowledge that people desire stablecoins, they're familiar with stablecoins, but we can kind of continue pushing demand into Bitcoin. That is like the bridge.
Yes, but I guess in order to build something like a Bitcoin-backed stablecoin, you're gonna need to put up a lot of collateral just in case of volatility. If the price goes down, you must make sure that the price of one USBC or whatever, Bitcoin stablecoin, is still gonna be at 1 USD or something, or whatever you establish.
I think that issue is like way overblown. Like I don't think collateral efficiency is a blocker to creating like Bitcoin backed stable coins. And a lot of these kind of like newer evolution of of Bitcoin-backed stablecoins are actually like very collateral efficient. And yeah, like what's preventing them from like scaling to tens or hundreds of billions of dollars, it isn't the fact that like, oh, you have to over collateralize these stablecoins. Like that's literally never been a blocker. Like that's a total red herring. Like it's a non-issue whatsoever. The blocker really has just been like the design of the protocols were very like weak and actually centralized. They aren't anymore because there's like some new models that have come out, and you just need to like basically find the demand for why somebody would use a Bitcoin-backed stablecoin. Like that's the bigger issue. Like it's the fact that you have to like over collateralize with Bitcoin in order to like, you know, create these stablecoins. That's a non-issue. The issue is like, okay, Vlad, I have a Bitcoin-backed stablecoin. This thing, let's just assume it's fully decentralized. Like there's no centralization risk whatsoever. Like, why would you actually use that? That's the main issue. And really it comes down to, it's like, man, would I rather hold this like random Bitcoin-backed stablecoin that like nobody's ever heard of, or Tether, or one of these stablecoins that like earns interest? And so finding just the demand for this issue. And I think where we could potentially see it is with privacy. Like right now, this intersection of like stablecoins and privacy, it's non-existent. It's like, I would argue, impossible to get, because if you have a stablecoin like Tether and you say, I want dollars, but I want to use them privately, well, as soon as it goes into like a shielded pool, like a Monero style setup, or like a Zcash style or shielded CSV or whatever, boom, it gets censored. Like Paolo and Tether or Jeremy Allaire, they just say, we're just going to like block it. So if you want to access private stability, you need a censorship resistant stablecoin. And in order to have a censorship resistant stablecoin, like you need to be able to, you know, program BTC into like a ZK rollup. Then you need to be able to have like a actually truly decentralized protocol that can mint these stable coins, and that there isn't an actual like censorship vector. If you can do that, then you have this world where you can put in BTC as collateral, you can borrow against it at a very low interest rate, which is what everybody wants. Those stable coins can proliferate, and then people that want it, they can put it into like a shielded pool. Like this is a true product market fit that doesn't yet exist today, but that we kind of now have the technology to build.
Yeah, it's interesting, and it's definitely much better than trusting the Tether treasury and using this on layers that can be absolutely censored because they're not sufficiently decentralized. But I keep thinking that all of this started from the idea of increasing Bitcoin adoption, and we got to a point where just reinventing the US dollar. And maybe it's super cypherpunk, right? Because if you go back like 35 or 40 years ago and read the mailing lists, you're going to see that all of them, they wanted to create a way to send US dollars. Mostly because there was someone running some remailer or some server that was useful to the community. And they were asking each other, so how do I pay you for this? Because it's useful, I want you to keep running it, but I don't want you to run out of money running it. And they're like, well, I don't want to tell you who I am. I don't want to tell you where I live. I don't want to tell you my bank account details. So how are we going to do this? It was problematic. And for them, I guess it was sort of the holy grail to create a private US dollar. Even eCash, the first form of digital cash, was using fiat currencies. It was just a way for you to get private transactions using these fiat currencies. So maybe it makes sense if you look at it from a cypherpunk perspective, but from a Bitcoin point of view, it's really strange.
I'm not sure I entirely agree. Like I think that there's actually like a very nice synergy here, and so bear with me. And you know, like we have this model that I've explained to you, where you can put in Bitcoin as collateral, you can borrow against it, you create these like censorship resistant Bitcoin-backed stablecoins, and then we agree that you could put these censorship resistant stablecoins into these like cypherpunk privacy level things, and that is kind of aligned with what you're saying, where okay, there is demand for this kind of like dark dollar, so to speak. But you would argue right now that hey, that doesn't actually help the mission of Bitcoin directly. But the way that these protocols work is the more usage or distribution you find for this like quote unquote dark dollar, or this like censorship resistant dollar, then the interest rate to borrow against your Bitcoin, the lower it will become. So you could get in a world where in this protocol, you could be able to borrow against your Bitcoin at near 0% interest rate. And that is a direct result of the demand for these dark dollars. So you appeal to that market for the kind of the censorship resistant dollars. That in turn will drive the interest rate down. The lower the interest rate becomes to borrow against your Bitcoin, the more that people will buy it up and see it as money and collateral, which will increase the number go up, which will increase the adoption. So all of this is a way for me to say that this kind of empty but like very desirable product market fit for private dollars will drive more adoption and higher number go up of Bitcoin. As more people adopt Bitcoin as collateral, we get closer to this world of hyper Bitcoinization. Eventually, hopefully the speculation goes down. You get a little bit more stability of Bitcoin, and then we get into this world where instead of people using dollars, they're using Bitcoin as a medium of exchange. I know that may not be like on the time frame that you would have hoped that, hey, everybody's using Bitcoin for payments today, but this is a very real, credible path to kind of bridge us to this eventual end game of using Bitcoin in a cypherpunk way.
I agree with you in this sense, but it's just not what I expected. It's very different from, I guess, the spirit of 10 years ago when everyone was trying to get Bitcoin to get accepted as a medium of exchange. And then we had the Lightning Network, which promised to get us there. And it seems like after so many years, there wasn't much adoption, and it's still difficult to use for people willing to accept payments in it, at least in a non-custodial way. And yeah, it's a bit desolating when you realize that we used to have Microsoft and Dell and Steam and Expedia and all of these companies being open to Bitcoin, to accepting Bitcoin payments. And now we're just happy when there's some fast food chain accepting BTC for their hamburgers or whatever. It seems like the adoption has gone down, and we're trying to reinvent ways to find Bitcoin useful.
I don't disagree with you there. The kind of narrative and the use case for Bitcoin has changed. I personally still am like very ideologically aligned with like where it can head to, even if that's kind of not this like idyllic vision we had for 10 plus years ago. So I'm sympathetic to your point, but I don't maybe have as pessimistic of a view on it as you might be alluding to.
Anyway, I want to ask you about the way that Alpen Labs uses ZK and also client-side validation, shielded client-side validation, and a couple of other topics. But let me present two more sponsors. The first one is Nuances.com, which is a peer-to-peer marketplace. You go to their website and you're going to be able to sell gift cards. You're going to be able to use their spot market, their peer-to-peer market. Most of the users are from Nigeria and the Middle East and some other African countries. The CEO, Ray Youssef, is trying to build this peer-to-peer economy for the global south and believes that that's where the adoption has to start, and that's where the revolution is going to be coming from. And there's this system in place which gives everyone a percentage, everyone who's involved in the deal. By providing some liquidity to this platform, you're basically allowing for more Bitcoin adoption in that part of the world. So if you're sympathetic with the mission, check out Nuance.com today. And if you don't mind doing the KYC, they also have a debit card that you can use for spending. I'm not too much into that, but maybe that you are. Not judging here. You do you, whatever is useful for what you're doing. And there's also hodling.ch, which is a business from Switzerland, which specializes in self-custody. So if you have a lot of Bitcoin and you're keeping it all in your house or something, and you're concerned that you're going to be subjected to a $5 wrench attack, you can ask them how you can set up your multi-sig in a way that you distribute the keys efficiently and in a way that you're not going to lose them. Or if you're part of a company that's deciding to buy Bitcoin because we're at the all-time high, that's the wise thing to do, to buy when it's super high. Anyway, if you're part of a company that wants to do this, then you should probably reach out to them and ask about a quorum or multi-sig or some sort of setup that is going to remove the CTO of the company or the IT guy from accessing everyone's coins, because you don't want that guy to be able to spend the company's Bitcoin. So check out hodling.ch if you think it's useful. And I think they also have a recovery system nowadays. So if you lost some words from your seed phrase or you scrambled the words, they can help you figure it out. So David, let's talk about shielded client-side validation, because you have mentioned it a few times. It was developed, and the first person who came up with it, if I'm not mistaken, is Liam Egan. There's also Robin Linus, who has his own version that's called ZK Coins, if I'm not mistaken. And it seems to be one of the most exciting projects when it comes to Bitcoin privacy.
Yeah, I mean, we could even trace the origins back even further. Like originally, this concept of like client-side validation came from like Peter Todd, who may or may not be Satoshi. Also joking, definitely not, but you know, people joke that he might be. But yeah, Peter kind of said, hey, there's like so many things that don't actually need to go onto the Bitcoin blockchain that you could do client side, which kind of just means, yeah, not on the Bitcoin blockchain. And so there's way less data and computation and everything that you need to put on the blockchain. Why don't we just do all of that peer-to-peer and then just post like the minimal amount of data possible to Bitcoin? Like if I send you, Vlad, a transaction, why does every single node in the network need to know and be aware and like validate all of that computation? And so Peter kind of proposed this idea, and then actually like your potential future fight opponent, Giacomo Zucco, really like picked this up and said, hey, like I want to pursue this concept. So he's been a big fan of it. And then there was a researcher by the name of Maxim Orlovsky who did RGB. So that's kind of like the train there. So in this client side validation, it's like a it's just like a separate protocol where like in order to send a transaction, like to make sure a transaction is valid, like you need to check a few boxes of criteria. Like if I send you, Vlad, a transaction, I need to make sure that like someone needs to know that I actually did in fact have like the amount of money. Somebody needs to make sure that I actually did like sign that cryptographic key. And then someone needs to make sure that like these funds have not been double spent. And what client-side validation said, it's like pretty much everything except for the double spend criteria can be taken off chain. So I can communicate that I had a certain amount of money as well as my signature to you, Vlad. Like we don't need a blockchain whatsoever for that. The only thing we need is just like to post some amount of data on the Bitcoin blockchain, the ledger, to say that those funds have not actually been double spent. And that is primarily like how RGB and client-side validation works. The issue here is that if I send you some amount of money via client-side validation, there's essentially like a transaction history that kind of like grows. It's like, well, these coins were sent from David to Vlad, and then Vlad, you send the coins, and it's kind of like the provenance or the history of the assets like grow off chain. And that becomes a major issue in RGB or Taproot assets, which also is a client-side validated protocol, is that the like state history essentially grows. And so how shielded CSV or ZK coins that you mentioned, like Robin Linus is doing ZK coins, and Liam and a few other people kind of like pursued shielded CSV, is like when I send you that data off chain, instead of sending you like the whole entire history of all of those coins so that you can kind of prove that it's valid, I just send you a zero knowledge proof, which compresses it. Like I am mathematically proving that the transaction history of those is essentially valid, that like that here's a valid signature, and yeah, you're essentially able to compress all of that history. And so you really get like the zero knowledge factor, the privacy, for free. Like when I send you that zero knowledge proof off chain on the client side, not only am I compressing the state history, which allows it to scale better, but it's also hiding all of the past history and data about that. You would just receive a transaction that says you, Vlad, received 1 Bitcoin. Here's a mathematical proof that's true. You don't need to be worrying about anything else. And so that's really this kind of transition from like the Giacomo Zucco, like Maxim Orlovsky, RGB, Taproot assets, Lightning, to now a kind of more shielded CSV ZK coins world, which gives us the scalability of client-side validation plus the perfect privacy. The only remaining caveat here is that, okay, we can now set up this like separate, basically blockchain where we can do these like, client-side validated, perfect privacy payments. But you still need some sort of bridge to bring your Bitcoin into that. You can almost think of it like a sidechain. And it's like, if we want to do perfect privacy Bitcoin payments, like how do we bridge from the layer one into this like shielded CSV or ZK coins paradigm? And for that, you need something like BitVM, or you need a ZK verifier. So all of this stuff about like, Robin Linus created BitVM, and that allows us to do ZK rollups. For a lot of these guys, like, they don't care about BitVM and they don't care about ZK rollups. They say, we want perfect privacy payments with Bitcoin. But just in order to have that, they had to like invent the ideas of BitVM in the first place. So I think for like Robin and Liam, I don't want to speak for them, but that's their end goal. For us, like ZK rollups are just kind of like a byproduct that's kind of been invented by these guys' desire to create shielded CSV.
Yeah, but it's interesting that these ZK rollups were able to get much more attention and interest as opposed to the privacy application of using BitVM. I'm not sure if I should say it, but someone who was involved in the creation of BitVM was very upset at one point because you see all the news about Alpen and Citrea raising a lot of money and, growing as companies and maybe pushing the development further. And then you realize, well, the use case that you intended and for which this is built is not receiving that much money. And maybe that privacy is sort of a lost cause in the case of Bitcoin because people pretend that they like it, but then they don't really fund it.
Well, I think there's multiple things going on there. I mean, yeah, like privacy is a less talked about and less, openly desired use case. And yeah, frankly, like it's a very precarious thing to say that you support. Like, look at the tornado catch guys. Like they're in freaking, they're struggling, like potentially on the precipice of getting like life in prison. So it's a very fine line between saying, hey, like, yes, I believe that privacy is a human right. Like I, support this kind of cypherpunk, vision. And hey, how do we go out and raise money for this? By the way, like VC, like you may get thrown in jail. Like that's kind of the unsaid thing that everybody's like a little bit scared about. So kind of seeing how these legal cases play out is like really important. And I think that's a super up in the air battle right now.
I agree with you partially. I think, okay, the case of Samurai Wallet, they have been in jail for about 1 year now. But the way that it seems, it's more about political speech that they might have broadcasted via Twitter. They said something about, well, Russian oligarchs, if you want to launder your money or whatever, you can use Samurai without any sort of censorship. And I think Wasabi being their competition, was more moderate in terms of making these statements. They were more, I guess, professional when it comes to PR, saying stuff like, well, privacy is for everyone. We also have this Chainalysis partnership where we have like a blacklist of UTXOs that we don't let into our coin joins and stuff like this. I think they were ahead of their time because right now on Ethereum you have Railgun, and you also have, I think you still have Tornado Cash, but they were able to censor it a little bit in its capacity. For example, I don't think North Korean hackers can still use Tornado Cash like they did before. But my point is that I'm not sure if privacy per se is the one that's under threat. It's just political speech in favor of privacy and some, I guess, narratives that you might push in terms of what you can use privacy for.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, that could be good nuance. I think that would be great. I mean, I think in this like ideal utopia world that I have, it's like everyone should have access to privacy, and like like you may not want to be a political activist, but other people might want to be. And I think like being able to protect their rights is important. But I think the barometer for all of this is kind of what you alluded to, where if you build some sort of protocol and North Korea wants to use it, like what's going to happen? And yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on it.
Yeah, but we have to remember that some of the same conversation was being had in 1992 or something with PGP.
Right.
With Phil
The crypto
Zimmerman, who
wars.
went to court because he published an open source piece of cryptography, which at the time was considered to be a weapon of the Allies who won World War II. And for them, cryptography was still classified. It was a military instrument. It was not supposed to be just uploaded on the internet so that Russians, or I'm not even sure who the other enemies were at the time. So the enemies of the Allies, who at the time were part of the Warsaw Pact on the other side of the Iron Curtain, could also get access to this. And it was just a couple of years after the USSR collapsed. It was still in a context where the mindset was still focused on this Cold War idea. And the way that they had to fight for it was to prove that you can publish this in a book and you can send this by mail somewhere else. Or you can put the code on a t-shirt and you can travel to different places and you can see the code for that. It's free speech. And it was an important victory for open source cryptography, without which we couldn't have had Bitcoin today. And I think we're at a similar point today, except that I don't see privacy advocates fighting as much as they're coping. I think there's a lot more coping involved and a lot more cooperation in terms of saying, well, we also don't want the bad guys to have privacy, so how about we make these adjustments to minimize the impact of the privacy, make it more compliant or whatever. But in the end, maybe that we're gonna get protocols which are uncompromising and, once again, I knocked something on my desk. Once you allow the state to have control and filtering over privacy protocols, it's sort of a slippery slope. Like, maybe in a few years, you're gonna make it redundant. You're gonna get to the point where what's the reason of using privacy anyway? Because you've given so much backdoor access. But I still hope that we're gonna have neutral protocols that are gonna get built and people will have access to that for reasons which are very legitimate, like your neighbor not knowing how much money you have, or we've seen so many cases over the last couple of weeks, especially in France, with crypto people being kidnapped and held for ransom and having their family members kidnapped, and it's just a very unfriendly world out there, and nobody really wants to get into that situation. And it could be much nicer if there was some serious privacy for this stuff.
Yeah, there's really like two different ways it could go, right? It's like maybe the government says, oh, okay, like we can support privacy as long as you have this whitelist and there are these kind of like backdoors, or as you alluded to, we actually can build like credibly robust and censorship resistant protocols, and people will find ways to use this like with or without permission. And in some ways, it's almost kind of like the Uber model where, once you've just kind of like broken through enough that, some of this like regulatory hurdles, like they almost just like have to capitulate because they're like, well, like we just can't stop this. And I think that's maybe somewhat what some people are hoping for. But this has broader implications for like, Bitcoin and the BitVM stuff. Like right now we have this one event, trust assumption, BitVM style bridge, and that's like pretty dang good, but it's not perfectly 100% trustless. And so I think if you really want to bring, privacy, like radical privacy to Bitcoin, you are eventually going to need to go past like the BitVM style model with this one event trust assumption and really build something that is robust, which brings us back to the soft forks, like bringing in a cat verifier, like a Stark verifier, or like multiply, or just a straight up native like ZKP verifier. Like if you truly want this defense in depth, accessibility to privacy, BitVM could be good enough, but it's not perfect. The other thing, I think I lost my train of thought. So yeah.
I also wanted to ask you, does Alpen Labs use ZK only for data compression and having this efficient system, or does it also use ZK for privacy?
Yeah. So just so the audience is aware, like ZK historically is associated with like zero knowledge, as in privacy. But today, most people, when we talk about ZK, we're using it as a scaling and like a compression technique. So there's no privacy associated with it. The technical term we should be using is like a validity proof rather than a zero knowledge proof. Validity proof, you get the succinctness and the scalability. ZK, you get privacy. Unfortunately, everyone just uses the term ZK, even though it doesn't actually have privacy. When it comes to the rollup and building this like BitVM style bridge, it's more a validity proof for the compression and succinct nature rather than for privacy. When we talk about shielded CSV, you're definitely using it both for the succinct compression effect and the perfect privacy. So again, just to recap that, it's kind of the validity proof to create this kind of bridge from bridging Bitcoin from the layer one into an EVM or a shielded CSV or whatever. But then once you're in something like shielded CSV as like a separate side system, that's when you get the privacy benefits.
Yeah, when I had that conversation with Talib, which I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, he did mention that there's only room for 3 or 4 ZK rollups, and he does hope that there's gonna be a third or a fourth one outside of Citrea and Alpen Labs, which is gonna focus on privacy. And I wanted to ask you if there is such a rollup today that's being deployed on Bitcoin.
Well, okay, so this kind of gets into like the I don't know of anybody that has like a working implementation of like a privacy rollup that's being built specifically on Bitcoin. But where this kind of like BitVM architecture is going is you could have like Bitcoin layer one, again, you have this ZK verifying BitVM bridge, and then you could have like different what we call like execution domains, where one of them could be an EVM like what Alpen and Citrea is building, and then you could have somebody could permissionlessly like deploy a radical privacy one. Someone could permissionlessly propose anything that you want, and like all of these can share like one single bridge and have interoperability. So I think before we even ask the question of is somebody building like a privacy roll up, it's like you need the lower level architecture so that they can easily launch this themselves. Like we don't want, I kind of disagree with what Talib is saying here, where like we don't necessarily want like a separate roll up for Alpen and a separate roll up for Citrea and a separate roll up for privacy, and like that leads to a lot of like fragmentation and essentially this siloed system. And this is the problem that's going on in Ethereum right now, is like you have all these teams that tried to create roll ups, and they all look like separate blockchains. Like they don't easily interoperate with each other, and so you have huge fragmentation. So a superior long-term solution is building something that like is more of a public open good, like a bridge, where you say, look, this doesn't belong to any team. It doesn't belong to Citrea. It doesn't belong to Alpen. It's more like an extension of Bitcoin Core itself. And anyone can use this neutral infrastructure that has no rent seeking or no token associated with it. And if you, Vlad, want to build or support like a privacy, roll up on top of that shared open bridge, you can. If the government wants to build a CBDC on top of that bridge, they could. Like you build this radically unopinionated stack. And I think that for me is like the ideological endgame of Bitcoin, where I personally am all about the monetary revolution. I'm about like the 21 million. I'm about like the privacy, like more of these cypherpunk ideals. However, you want to provide an unopinionated stack where you just say, look, we're not going to compel or coerce you into our views. Here's why we like our views, but if you want to do something else, your own roll up, it's fine, but you can use the shared infrastructure. That is kind of architecturally where this stuff is going, where you can appeal to everyone's preferences.
What about Lightning Network though? I think I mentioned it a few times before, but we didn't really get into it. What do you think went wrong there? Because it was supposed to be the one scaling solution to end them all. It was the scaling solution that was gonna make the block size increase not necessary anymore. And it seems like for all the promises and all the hopes and all the money that was invested in it, it's still not there. And I think it was like 2 years ago that what's his name, Antoine I don't remember.
Poinsett.
Can you say again?
I think it's like French. It's like Poinsett or Poinsett.
No, it's not that one. It's another
Oh,
Antoine. But
yes, I know who you're talking about.
yeah, he came up with this very critical bug of the Lightning Network and said that
Mm.
this is very dangerous. Money can be lost from channels because of this attack vector. And I remember it. Was it Antoine? Let me look it up.
Yeah,
I've
yeah,
been
it
messaging
was.
him.
I know who you're talking about.
And he said he's not gonna want to talk about this until he can actually fix it. And it's been like 2 years and there's no official fix. Right now, Lightning is still very small. If you look at it, I think there's like 5,000 Bitcoin that's locked on the Lightning Network. It's a small fraction of the Bitcoin economy. Exchanges process more BTC on a daily basis. You have businesses that maybe process more BTC on a daily basis. It's really disappointing. And my question for you is what do you think went wrong when I guess we relied too much on Lightning and then it did not deliver?
Yeah, well, a couple things. One, it was Antoine Riard.
Yeah, exactly.
And yeah, I mean, I think we just oversold, what Lightning can actually do. I still think Lightning has, product market fit, and it is very good at this like one specific subset of you can create a channel with someone and you can send like very high frequency, very small denomination amounts of payments, and like that is useful. But people who, again, in the Bitcoin community, like a lot of people in the Bitcoin community, they're just not like very technically competent. And so they weren't really able to understand that, oh, wow, like you have to open channels and close channels and that costs money. And you need to create like inbound liquidity. And you can't actually, program, the wallet and the UX experience. And, oh, whoops, like we need to create this like very custodial thing if we want to like manage the channels. And I think there's just kind of this expectation of, like, okay, like we're past the block size wars and we now support this Lightning thing, and Lightning is like, like Jesus Christ, like reincarnated, and he's going to come here to like save, all of our, Bitcoin concerns. And I think that narrative just like spiraled out of control, and people didn't realize like how limited Lightning is. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it was a little bit of a victim where like the Lightning Labs team, like, I don't know, they're not going to like dispel it and be like, yeah, no, actually Lightning can only do these like small niche of things. So I think they just kind of like leaned into it and like allowed this narrative to spiral out of control that Lightning is maybe more powerful than it actually is.
I remember a meme that I think was posted by Layer 2 Labs, if I'm not mistaken. It comes from the Rick and Morty episode with the robot that passes butter. I'm not sure if you know that clip. But basically, there's this robot built by Rick Sanchez, who is the main character of Rick and Morty. And he built this robot, and the robot has an existential moment and says, "What is my purpose?" And Rick answers to him saying, "Well, you pass butter." And the robot is very disappointed in himself, realizing, well, he's not very important in the world. And this meme was adapted by some people making fun of the Lightning Network, and they put basically a Lightning logo on top of the robot, and the robot asked, "What is my purpose?" And I guess, I'm not sure who's supposed to be Rick, but the answer is, well, you get Bitcoiners accustomed to using custodians. And the robot is very disappointed, like, oh shit. I've done what basically Bitcoin was invented to avoid or to eliminate. And I also find this funny, and this is like a side conversation related to Lightning, because we see the reemergence of eCash. And eCash was a system that had very good privacy, but was centralized. And in the context of Lightning, it can work if you're using custodial Lightning. But once again, Bitcoin was invented as a way to be better than eCash, to be decentralized. And instead of focusing on building something which is decentralized, we're just saying, well, let's bring back this 35-year-old invention and slap it on top of this Bitcoin layer. And I don't know, it's very weird. It's a weird time to be a Bitcoiner. A lot of the stuff that you thought was true about the system turns out to have been just a bullish narrative. And I look forward to the sailor generation to also have their wave of disillusionment and realize, wait, it doesn't always go up. Wait, Bitcoin can do this too. You're supposed to also use it as money. You're supposed to do this. It's gonna be funny.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you that like there's an irony of these scaling solutions that we purported, that there's actually like pretty significant trade-offs that are maybe like antithetical to what we hope for, where it's like Lightning is more custodial, so is like Fedi mints. And yeah, like I do agree with you that maybe in some ways Bitcoin has like lost a little bit of that ethos in that vision. But I don't know. I'm just like not as phased by it. Maybe because I like being the underdog. Like I felt very uncomfortable when it's like Bitcoin is winning, it's becoming mainstream. Now I'm sitting here saying like, oh man, like they don't know that we're building ZK Rollups, and like we're building non-custodial solutions, and like we're gonna bring privacy, and like we're gonna have Bitcoin-backed stable coins, and like I like that that's not mainstream. I like that, like this kind of new thing of like Bitcoiners don't know that. For me, it's more fun to be on the bleeding edge, and like I don't need the notoriety of number go up in mass market. Like in fact, by the time we maybe build these ZK rollups, like we have all this cool stuff, and it becomes like everybody's like, whoa, this is the best thing going. It's better than like the custodial TradFi solutions. Maybe I'll just be like, like I'm so tired of that. Like we talked about that 10 years ago. Maybe that's just part of my personality. But yeah, I've never been more excited about Bitcoin, honestly.
Well, that's good. Are you going to Las Vegas next week?
Yeah, I'm actually so I'm gonna be on a panel with Paul Willem, also from Botanics, maybe one other person, but they always put me on panels with Paul. I don't know if that's like punishment or reward.
Paul from Botanics?
No, Paul Storks.
Oh, that's gonna be fun.
Yeah, I really like Paul, and he's heard every single argument imaginable on Drivechains, and replied to all of them ad nauseum. But yeah, I just think I'm very supportive of Drivechains. I think it's like a great idea, but I just think the puck is moving in a different direction.
Well, let's see, because if we get a Covenant soft fork, I think you can also deploy Drivechains without the protections granted by BIP 301. But I think you can do BIP 300 with Covenants. And if there's market demand for it, maybe that we're gonna activate that also as BIP 300. It's just that there's this assumption, according to game theory, that the miners are gonna be honest. It's like I like to present this metaphor. It's like farmers deciding that they want to burn their crops to get the money for insurance. Of course they can do that, but nobody's gonna want to work with them again.
Yeah, I'm not worried about the game theory of miners will steal. Like I think I'm in agreement that it seems very, 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 very unlikely that they would steal the funds. But I think drive chains have other like limitations and maybe just like headwinds against them.
At the same time, what I like about Drivechains is how they don't just promise, it's part of the design to pay the miners. Every transaction fee is something that the miners collect. I was gonna ask you, how do these ZK rollups contribute to the security budget?
Yeah, quite significantly. So, I mean, the way that miners make money in drive chains is like you have the Bitcoin layer one that the miners are obviously mining, and then they're merge mining these other chains. So like they're running the nodes of these other layers. They're doing transactions on these other kind of drive chains type of layers, and those miners are ordering or sequencing the transactions. So they both collect the transaction fees, and because they're ordering the transactions, they can also extract MEV, which can be extremely profitable, but also hyper centralizing to the Bitcoin layer one. So the MEV is like a little bit of a criticism. I'd actually say a pretty significant criticism of drive chains. Now, rollups, on the other hand, again, you have Bitcoin layer one, and then you have some sort of rollup. Let's assume everybody's doing, DeFi or payments or privacy, whatever they want. Now, you can take all of that transaction data and you can compress it, not totally, but you can get like up to like a 30 to 50x compression effect on it, and you can post all of that data into the Bitcoin layer one. So because you have to post that data into the Bitcoin layer one, you have to pay for that block space. So a rollup in its purest form allows us to have any sort of expressivity like DeFi or privacy or payments. And then it allows us to get up to 30 to maybe 50x, scalability improvements. And all of that, because you're posting the data into the Bitcoin layer one blocks, you're driving pretty significant revenue to the Bitcoin miners. And this goes back to kind of what you've mentioned a couple of times with the Seroy guys and Talib talking about how, you can only have like 3 to 4 rollups before the block spaces will fill. But in reality, people on the rollup, they have the option. They could say, do I want to pay for the Bitcoin block space for the highest level of security? So they get like that 30 to 50x scalability improvement, but they have to pay for that block space. Or they can get 1,000, a million x scalability improvement, but they can post their data elsewhere. And so visually, like I'll put a metaphor here of what this looks like is like, if you imagine like the Bitcoin layer one is a bucket and you're pouring in transaction fees into that bucket, you will essentially fill up the L1 block fees up to near the top, where miners are becoming like fabulously rich. The security of the network, we're going to feel good about it. It's probably not going to be sitting at 1 sat per VByte. Like miners are going to be making a lot of money. But if that bucket fills up too high, you'll start spilling over into these kind of like lower security data solutions for kind of like less valuable transactions. And so like the highest value of transaction, people say, hey, like I need Bitcoin level security for this transaction, it's over $10,000 or whatever, like that will just kind of sit in the bucket and increase the security budget of the miners, and like we'll feel very secure that transaction fees are securing the network. But you can have this spillover effect where people that want cheaper transactions and want more scalability can use these alternatives. So rollups kind of give us the best of both worlds.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. Also, regarding my previous question about going to Las Vegas, it was mostly on the topic of going mainstream, because you're going to realize that you're surrounded by politicians and comedians and all of these celebrities who got invited, and they're going to say something very bullish about Bitcoin. It's going to be like a 3-day podcast, which is being voiced by these famous people who talk about Bitcoin, and they're going to say, well, it's so great and we want to allow this to flourish in the USA, and blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to that event because, first of all, it's super expensive, and secondly, I already know what to expect. But yeah, it's strange to come from this very niche project, which is trying to stay close to the roots of Bitcoin, and then walk into this pool of new Bitcoiners who are enthusiastic about it, but they don't even understand how it works. And maybe that they're only there because they want to make more US dollars. And hopefully they will understand more about the technology along the way, but I doubt it.
Yeah, I'm sympathetic to what you're saying here, but I think like Lynn Alden talks about this, and many people do. Like if we expect Bitcoin to kind of like be this global asset, like this is just the natural evolution. Like you're going to have these large factions and pools of people who are not necessarily like ideologically aligned with like our perception of what Bitcoin is. Like that is just the natural reality of it. And hopefully over time we can build out these more like cypherpunk aligned solutions, and eventually that camp that thought they came into it for number go up start to appreciate what we say Bitcoin is for, and we build out just solutions that are better than TradFi and fiat, and like hopefully we can continue to show like how we perceive Bitcoin is better. But I'm at peace with the fact that a lot of people are in this for number go up, and a lot of people have no idea about the underlying principles. As long as we don't abandon those principles entirely, and we don't like Bitcoin has fully gone, centralized. Like as long as just that light, that kind of that light of like the core ideology underpinning Bitcoin still exists and can be an option for people that value it. That's what I think I'm happy with.
I should have asked you this much sooner or earlier into the interview, but does Alpen Labs have any token? Because that's I think the main idea that people have about these extra layers and anything that's imported from Ethereum.
No, we don't have a token. A rollup doesn't need a separate independent token. You can use Bitcoin or like kind of like the Alpen version of Bitcoin in order to pay gas and transaction fees. Now, can people deploy tokens? Yeah, like it's an expressive EVM environment, so like we can't prevent or forbid people from that. And just in general, like I'll tell, even on like the business side, like we talk with a lot of these teams in the Ethereum ecosystem, and they're like, oh, like you need some sort of token to incentivize usage, and I'm like, no, well, we don't. And like I think that we're pulling in like the largest tier one blue chip companies and distribution channels without it. I think people are seeing there's like a bit of an existential crisis going on in Ethereum. People are like, holy shit, like they thought they were fine with like all the tokens and the gambling, and they're like, all right, this is just like maybe a small little means to get us to this end goal of like scaling Ethereum. But now they're like, this thing's gotten out of control. And even the people that were kind of like pro Ethereum and kind of like supportive of tokens, they're kind of wanting to come back to Bitcoin. They're saying like, I want something real. Like I want real product market fit. I want products that can stand up on their own merit without these token incentives. So long answer short, like no, we don't have a token. I think that we're not like radical ideologically against them, but we're kind of bending over backwards to avoid one because we just think they lead to horrendous incentives and they're not directly necessary.
But if you're to do some sort of fundraiser, do you think it's fine to issue a new token for this purpose and say, well, it's worth this much once you buy it from us, but after that, we're not going to hold any of it. We're not going to engage in it. It's your problem what you do with it. It's like a collectible. You think that's a legit use case, or is it sort of scammy?
I mean, it is. I hate the word scam because it's just like overused. But yeah, like there have been some pretty despicable practices with tokens and like justifications for them. You know, in my opinion, my bigger issue is that they just lead to horrendous incentives. Like people start off and saying, "Hey, we're going to build something like really cool, and it's going to scale Bitcoin, and like we just need this token just to like incentivize usage and everything." But if you're a founder, if you're a human, and all of a sudden you thought you were in this for the right reasons, and then you're sitting there looking at me like, I just pulled in like 100 million, like maybe $1 billion. All of a sudden you're looking at your wife and you're looking at your girlfriend and being like, hey, this seems like a lot of work, and like it'd be pretty dope if we just like went out and lived down on an island together, and that's my biggest issue with the tokens is they've radically set back our industry from like a development and engineering perspective. Like the way capitalism works is like you do need these lower time preferences. Like you need people that have big ambitious visions to feel like they can't just get an instant reward like right off the bat. Like that if you're making a venture capital bet, like you're 10 years down, like you're motivated, you're freaking down there working on it. And if you can get a liquidation or a liquidity event within the first 6 to 12 months, it's just human incentives. Like it's just going to decimate our ability to like further these ideas that we have. So the kind of like brutalization of the incentives is really the biggest issue that I have with tokens.
I agree with you. Also, Orkan says hello. Orkan Kilic, the founder of Citrea. I'm not sure if he's the only founder, but he's definitely the CEO. And I was going to ask you, do you think that the Lightning Network, technically, since it's it's not, it's blockchain agnostic, you can use it on any protocol or chain. Do you think you can use that for settlements to make swaps between ZK rollups? Like a bridge of sorts?
Yeah, and sorry, my AirPods like ran out of battery, so hopefully this sound is okay. Yeah, in theory, you could take Lightning channels and like bridge them between different rollups. But in this kind of vision I had laid out to you, where like you can have Bitcoin layer 1, and then you have like a shared bridge, and then you can have all of these different like execution domains. You could have like the EVM, you could have privacy, you could have da 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 da. Like if you share the same bridge, then you can actually like trustlessly using zero knowledge proofs like bridge and share liquidity between these different domains. So what you're kind of telling me is like, hey, could you use Lightning to swap like to create a Lightning channel network between these different rollups, and it becomes like the mesh in between this? Yes, in theory you could, but if you have like a shared bridge, in like one single kind of like ZK rollup style bridge, then you don't even need Lightning Network as like an interoperability layer as much. So the jury is still kind of out about how this architecture is going to play out. Maybe people will use Lightning, maybe they won't have to because there's a better solution that we could do with zero knowledge proofs. Like, the jury's still out of it.
So when do you think that Alpen Labs is going to launch on the main chain? And what are the expectations in terms of users, liquidity, enthusiasm surrounding it?
Well, I think we're targeting, later this year. I don't know, maybe Q4, but like TBD on the exact time frame. Normal engineering delays and disclaimers. In terms of like the usage, I don't know. We'll see. I think we'll see. I do think that there could be substantial demand, but like some of these bridges are kind of novel. It's probably a little bit more difficult to go up to a big investor and say, hey, like bring on $10 billion of BTC. Like we're pretty sure this tech works. So these things are just gonna have to have time and market and Lindy and like being ballot tested before people will probably bridge like insane amounts of BTC over.
I think the biggest risk when it comes to this kind of innovation on Bitcoin is that the culture is against it. So you can build something super cool, super useful with a perfect market fit, but at the same time, you're gonna get a lot of hostility or otherwise, what's the word for it? When people don't care. Apathy. A lot of apathy from the Bitcoiners. I think early on, Lightning had a similar situation before it had a big marketing push. But it's not very intuitive to most people that they should be using this. I know that Peter McCormack bought his Aston Martin using money that he made from referrals from BlockFi. And BlockFi was providing a service as a company, which Citrea and Alpen Labs are going to be offering as a protocol under ZK Rollups. So I do believe there is definitely a huge market for BTC-backed loans. But I also see, at least within my Twitter bubble, a lot of opposition and negativity towards anything which is trying to bring something which is not Bitcoin native. It seems like these guys were almost programmed to believe that they should only use Bitcoin on the base layer, on Lightning Network, and that's maybe the only situation where they can say they're not making normal transactions. And Blockstream, of course, made sure that their federation is inserted into the conversation and is socially fine to use a solution which is not decentralized. But we do need to work a lot on perception and the fact that nowadays, even for the most stupid reason, which is up return size, you have this social battle between factions. And I do believe most of it, as you said, is guerrilla marketing from Ocean, because they mine like a block every day, which, if you blink, you miss it. It's not a major mining pool, but when they do this sort of virtue signaling, they're in the news and everyone talks about them. And, they have some credibility.
Yeah, I have a little bit of a different view on this. Like, we just don't need the approval of the Bitcoin community to do what we're doing. Like, whether they say, wow, this like passes the Bitcoin, vibe check, I really don't care. Like, we can now build this by like allowing Bitcoin to reason about zero knowledge proofs. And if people like Jimmy Song and Giacomo and whoever else like don't approve it, I'm like, sorry, like we're just doing it. We don't need to fork Bitcoin. Like, we're building within the consensus rules. And if they don't like it, if they don't approve it, then don't use it. But then the question kind of moves to, well, okay, we can now build this and we can now do this thing. Like, we need to actually have a product on there that people value. We can't like preach at them morality stuff and say, oh, don't you want to use this? It's so much more aligned with the Bitcoin ethos and it's non-custodial. And like, we almost like shame them into like trying to convince them to use a ZK Rollup. If they don't want to use it, don't use it. I really don't care. But
I think this example you gave of like Bitcoin backed borrowing, like this is something that just economically and rationally, like people want. They want to be able to post their Bitcoin as collateral and borrow dollars against it and not sell it. And that is kind of the point of like Inception, where I think people are going to be looking at some of the applications on these Bitcoin ZK rollups, and they're going to say, wow, with like no token incentives whatsoever and like no separate token, like this is the single best way to borrow against your Bitcoin, where you can do it at higher loan to values, you can do it at much lower rates, you can do it without KYC, you can do it like more frictionlessly and more snappy with fast transactions. Like there's not going to be this separate thing where it's like you have to convince people to do it with like these token incentives, or you have to say like, oh, hey, don't you want to do this on chain, bro? Like DeFi is so cool. It's just literally like my dad is going to look at this thing and say, wait, like this is awesome. Like you're telling me I can borrow it like 4% against like my Bitcoin collateral and it's instant and I can just do it from my mobile phone. And once you build out that product and it can just straight up beat the TradFi solutions, it can beat the strikes, it can beat, you know, the Ledins and the Unchains and like all of these kind of things that all the Bitcoiners approve of, then it doesn't matter about getting anyone's approval or like what's morally the right or wrong thing. It's just, hey, we're going to win because we built a product. By the way, you're kind of supporting trustless non-custodial solutions. And we've kind of said that for many years in Bitcoin, where it's like, oh, you just need to build these things that have like clean UX and they feel like a normal TradFi Web 2 solution. But it was cope, like it was a lie, like we couldn't actually do it. Now, like you don't have to believe me. And that's kind of like why we at Alpen don't market ourselves very much, because it's like, we're just going to build it. Like we don't have a token that we're shilling. And when the time is right, you know, judgment will be, do people actually want to use this thing because it's just straight up better product?
Yeah, I do like your attitude. And you mentioned something about your dad being able to use the service from Alpen Labs on his mobile phone. This was going to be my follow-up question. What's the user experience going to be like? What kind of wallets are going to be supporting this ZK rollup? Are you going to have existing wallets doing integrations, or do you have your own tools that people need to download?
Well, in theory, you can attack it from all angles. Like, you know, we could build our own wallet. You know, you could integrate it into existing wallets. You know, in an ideal world, and it's going to take quite a bit of engineering to get there, but there is a path to get there where, you know, you could just embed this straight into other existing distribution channels, like you know, Cash App or something. And Cash App just has like, you know, they don't try to like install MetaMask or some sort of like EVM wallet. They can just, you know, kind of seamlessly integrate this backend of like a ZK rollup into their front end, and like users don't even realize it or what's happening. Like Cash App just says, hey, you know, you have a Bitcoin balance, you want to borrow against it, great, here's stablecoins in your wallet. You know, like the Seroy guys are also pursuing this path, where, you know, you have things like passkeys. Like here, I have my cell phone. Like most people don't know this, but there's actually like a secure enclave like inside this, which is basically a hardware wallet. Like there's essentially a ledger or like a trezor device in this phone. But because you can't like program Bitcoin in a certain way, you can't put your private keys like into the Apple cell phone. But once you're in a rollup and you have more ability to kind of like program then you can actually store kind of like your private key in your mobile phone. So you don't have to like either have a hot wallet that can be hacked, or you don't have to like carry around your ledger. Like you can hold your private keys and you can access your funds like through, you know, your Face ID on your phone. Like this is the type of stuff that is possible with a ZK rollup that's not possible with something like Lightning Network. It's like that beautiful UX. You need expressivity, you need programmability.
Yeah, but at the same time, can you name any wallets that are available today and have been modified or forked to work with Alpen Labs?
With Alpen, no. I mean, we're like, you know, not even on a public testnet yet. We're on a private devnet. So again, that's why sometimes I'm a little bit hesitant to like overmarket and overhype this stuff, because we're kind of just like focused on building it first. But hopefully, you know, a year so from now, I'll be able to come back to you and be like, Vlad, you can actually try it. You don't have to just listen to me talking. So if people want to be skeptical for now, it's fine. I think John Light actually posted this like in response to like Balaji's, like the big, you know, tech investor several months ago. And John just said something to the effect of like, rather than explain it to you, like, I'm just going to build it and show you. And I think that's kind of the mentality that we're having at Alpen, is like minimal hype, just we're going to do it, and the proof will be in the pudding.
I remember last year I was at Pizza Day in Prague, and Citrea was there doing a demo, and they asked everyone to run MetaMask. And I think it was a very big cultural tipping point, at least to myself, watching Bitcoiners just take out their laptops, install MetaMask, and configure it to work with the Citrea testnet. And I was thinking, this is a tool that was built for Ethereum, and now it's working for this ZK Rollup, and there seemed to be no opposition among the people there. They just did this. They followed every step of the hackathon. And I was wondering if the wallets that are most likely to work with these ZK rollups are something like Blue Wallet or whatever on Bitcoin, which is already popular and has a lot of users, or do you think it's gonna be tools that are important from Ethereum?
I don't want to sound too like vague here, but I think all the options are on the table. In reality, in the short term, some of these things like MetaMask are just configured to more easily integrate with EVM compatible dApps. But yeah, I mean, I think even some of these Bitcoin Lightning wallets are going to look at this and say, again, like the Bitcoin backed borrowing is like a perfect example. They're going to say, ooh, like that's pretty compelling. Like we would love to offer our customers an option to borrow at 4% fixed interest rate against their Bitcoin, and they kind of have like no choice but to say, all right, we're gonna have to start integrating this.
You've mentioned the 4% a few times, and there's this meme that stems from the 2021 events. Where does the yield come from?
Yeah, so I think a good example of a protocol on Ethereum is like Morpho. Like the OG protocol is something called Aave. Aave is like the biggest, money market kind of DeFi protocol on Ethereum, where you can put in collateral, say Ethereum, and then you can borrow stablecoins against it. So when I'm referring to this 4%, like you could go to app.morpho.com or whatever right now, or Aave, and you could put in like a wrapped version of a BTC, and then you can borrow stablecoins at that 4% rate. Now, some important caveats are it is wrapped, so it's trusted, it's centralized. You're using WBTC. It also is like a variable interest rate. But aside from that, like the code, I think Morpho in particular is only like 600 lines of code, and there's no rehypothecation, like there's no reusing of that collateral, and there's no like fractional reserve lending. It's just like this is a very clean and simple product that, again, like it doesn't even have these like insane token incentives that are like driving down the interest rate. This is just a product of because of the more seamless rails of like DeFi, it's more easily able to amass like dollar and stablecoin liquidity. When there's more stablecoins available to lend, it can drive the interest rates down. So we've kind of like had this cope in like the crypto industry where it's like, oh, once we have these permissionless DeFi rails, everything's going to be more seamless. And a lot of that stuff was like kind of lies. But in this case, it wasn't. Like this advent of like stablecoins and these DeFi protocols really has allowed for more seamless capital formation, which has driven interest rates down. Now, the only credible criticism against something like Aave and Morpho, in my opinion, versus the kind of like custodial Bitcoin solutions, is that these are variable interest rates. And so some people would say, hey, like there could be a scenario where you think you're getting 4% and then tomorrow it just like blasts up to like 20%. And that is, I think, a valid criticism, even though historically, for the past like couple of years, you can see that the average interest rate, I think, sits around like, 5 or 6%. Like it's still very, very, very competitive. I think over the coming months, people will start to see some of these protocols that are moving from variable to fixed interest rate products. And once you have that, you're going to say there's no more excuses. Like, why would you pay Strike or Unchained or these companies that I respect and like, but why would you pay them 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15% interest with KYC, with like added friction, with renewal fees, with like lower loan to values, worse terms, when you can just go on chain and you get all of that plus better terms at a cheaper rate, and then you'll be able to get fixed interest rate. Once that final little bridge is crossed of a fixed interest rate DeFi protocol, which I do think is coming, it's just 100% better.
It seems to me like these ZK rollups such as Alpen Labs and also Citrea are the best part of Ethereum coming back to the best and most secure network, which is Bitcoin. And the question that I have for you, do you believe that there are other parts of Ethereum which are legit and interesting and should be making their way to Bitcoin?
Yeah, I think I've touched on a lot of them. Yeah, like the DeFi, like borrowing, I think is a major one. I think like a Liquidity V2 style stablecoin, which is like a scalable and actually real deal, like censorship resistant Bitcoin-backed stablecoin, is a solution that's real. I think some of the, when I was mentioning kind of like the wallet UX and like the, hardware wallet being in your phone, that's kind of part of this thing called like account abstraction, which allows you to get this like world-class payment UX where if you wanted to pay with stable coins, you could. If you wanted to pay the gas fees with Bitcoin, you could. If like we want to onboard 1 million people in Africa, like we could essentially pay like their transaction fees on their behalf. Like you can really get granular and customizable on like the payment UX. Yeah, again, like ZK was pioneered in Ethereum. I think that covers like the major things that it's like the best of Ethereum we're going to bring back to Bitcoin. And I need to be real, like there will also probably be some bullshit that comes in from the EVM, but it'll be isolated to the ZK rollups. Like it won't infiltrate down into the Bitcoin layer one. Yeah.
When it comes to scaling Bitcoin, do you believe that at this point increasing the block size would be beneficial for the project?
Oh man, you're going to try to get me jumped at Vegas.
Not necessarily. You can choose to not answer this.
No. I mean, I think it's been interesting to for people to kind of like recontemplate a block size increase. Like I think Adam Back, even has kind of said, hey, like he's not totally opposed to a block size increase. I'm actually like halfway through hijacking Bitcoin from Roger. I think he makes like some compelling points. I think James O'Byrne has kind of like mentioned this as something he's open to. Even Robin Linus has mentioned open to a block size increase. So there's actually like quite a bit of like people that are like, more Bitcoin aligned who are saying like, look, a block size increase isn't totally off the table. With that said, for me, it's like not really a priority at this point. One, because it's just like, it's such a crazy, like contentious issue. And even if we didn't have a block size increase, like I'm just so optimistic about like how far we can push these ZK rollups that I'm like, I got, I'm happy enough without a block size increase. Like if we get to 1 billion users on chain, and then you're like, okay, it'd be beneficial to have a block size increase. Like I don't think it should be totally off the table.
Yeah, to me, I think it was like 3 years ago that I interviewed Thomas Voigtlin, the creator of Electrum Wallet, which I think is one of the oldest Bitcoin wallets out there. And what he said at the time is that he was against the block size increase under the provisions of the New York Agreement, but he was never against the idea of increasing the block size. So if another campaign starts and it's legit and it concerns onboarding more people to Bitcoin in a trustless and non-custodial way, then he would be for it. And at the time it was much more controversial. I think now saying that you like bigger blocks in Bitcoin is much safer than it was 3 or 4 years ago when it was peak toxicity and it was peak copium that 4 megabytes with SegWit is gonna be enough forever. But at the same time, I think also John Carvalho, who basically for a while was the poster boy for small blocks because he had that interview with Roger Ver and he became the Bcash guy and everyone celebrated him as a hero for a while. And even he is saying nowadays that it's maybe much better to increase the block size than to try to find other workarounds and tricks that are not as effective. And where I'm getting with this is that you had this wave of Bitcoin developers and early adopters who got phased out in 2017. They went to BCH, they went to Ethereum, they went to other projects, and they were very much in favor of increasing the block size, right? And now you see Jameson Lopp, you see John Carvalho, and you see all of these guys who are part of the new guard who came in and said, well, we're toxic, we're super maximalist about this, we're not compromising Bitcoin for the sake of doing this. Now they're coming to the conclusions of Gavin Andresen, of Mike Belshi from BitGo. I mean, it's sort of funny, right? After 7 years of growth and learning and trying to deploy projects and protocols and trying to work with these limitations and believing that Lightning is gonna be the solution, they come to the conclusion that they hated like 7 years ago.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I guess you switched from the other microphone to your AirPods.
I got a little bit extra battery, I think. Yeah, I think people just some contingent of people, like you said, maybe the Jamesons and John Carvalho and some of these other people, like I think they're just coming to the realization that okay, like maybe the pendulum swung like a little too far into the extreme of this like purist camp, and I think they're just trying to. It's like, how do you find that line between yeah, okay, like we agree, you know, less change to Bitcoin is better, and Bitcoin is about money, and we want to scale on layer twos, but like there also are like literal technical limitations. And I think that kind of like quote unquote pragmatism is coming back to Bitcoin, and people are just saying, look, like the pendulum has just like swung too far to the extreme, and like we can't let Bitcoin development be dictated by people who are not developers and who literally have like no idea about how these protocols work, and their only concept of Bitcoin is like metaphors. For me, that's like an immediate flag. When somebody is trying to explain Bitcoin development with a metaphor, it's like, well, to explain how your node works, it's like, let me, you know, come up with this like metaphor about how it's like, you know, Bitcoin is energy and stuff. I'm like, done. You know, like we are not having, you know, consensus conversations with metaphors. You know, if you're going on a podcast and you want to explain it with a metaphor, that's fine. But like that's the kind of Bitcoin camp that I am kind of like rejecting a bit, and I think those other people are as well. Carballo in particular, I think he's interesting. Like he had all these like unique ideas around Bitcoin, and now he's like, you know, the we should call Bitcoin bits now guy. You know, so, like, I don't even know what he's working on anymore.
He actually has a pretty cool project with Synonym. They deployed a social network that's gonna get launched this summer. I was part of the beta testing team, and it's interoperable with Nostr, and they also have their own Bitcoin development kit. I mean, they've been building stuff. It's just that the culture that he nurtured, which is that of being toxic and negative about stuff, didn't help him also have successful products. And it's a bit tragic when you think about it, because he was super popular when he was toxic, but now that he's optimistic and he's building stuff, the same people who are following him don't seem to care as much. And they moved on to Sailor or whoever is speaking the same language but with different words. And it's really unfortunate what you said, because it seems like right now the people who are in control of the Bitcoin narrative, and they seem to have the loudest voices when it comes to consensus, are the Austrian economist wannabes. I'm not gonna call them Austrian economists because I don't consider Saifedean to be a true Austrian economist. But this guy sold like 1 million books, right? And people look up to him and they think, well, he's the Bitcoin guy. He's the one who understands how this works. And really, he doesn't. And he still maintains that attitude that he kept from 2017 of being on guard because the barbarians are at the gates or whatever, and they're gonna attack Bitcoin any moment now, and every attempt to change might just be a Trojan horse to attack Bitcoin. It's a very dangerous mentality, especially if you're non-technical and you don't know anything and you keep on maintaining this position that Bitcoin should never change, it's perfect money, it's already been improved, why do you need anything else other than the tools that already exist? Especially when you admittedly don't pay with Bitcoin and use credit card or whatever, because you think that you should apply Gresham's law and only use Bitcoin for saving. It's a deep rabbit hole once you get inside of it from the other side of it. So you came out of it because you outgrew your mentors, I guess. A lot of people learn from Saifedean, and then you learn more about Bitcoin than he ever will know. And then you go back to try to explain to the other people, and it's just madness going back there. But I hope, honestly, I think this narrative and this approach will only work for as long as the number keeps going up. And maybe that the number grow up factor of it is what keeps us from actually building something meaningful. Because Bitcoin never had the existential crisis that we keep talking about. That after multiple halvings, we're gonna see an issue with the security budget, or that it doesn't scale, because right now, if you look at the mempool, it seems to be scaling very well because the industry has routed around transacting on the Bitcoin blockchain. So I guess in a bear market that lasts for a few years, we're gonna get the best chances at building something, because all of these people will maybe leave Twitter and GitHub and not talk about Bitcoin anymore, maybe find some other venture in politics or nutrition or fitness or whatever they're gonna be selling just because Bitcoin is not hot anymore. And the cypherpunks are gonna be able to build the tools that are gonna get us into a new golden age. I don't know. I'm so hopeful. I think every Bitcoin bull market has been preceded by some sort of breakthrough. And if you look at it, there was some sort of narrative or something that got built, which gave everyone hope that Bitcoin is really gonna work. This time around, the narrative that started the bull market is the ETF. And it seems like that's the scaling layer. That's how Bitcoin is being transacted and used. And nowadays, I'm pretty sure we have a lot of paper Bitcoin, which I'm not even sure how it's going to get redeemed and what's going to happen afterwards. But I'm convinced, I mean, you're more optimistic than I am, but I'm convinced that this will not end well. And once it does end, that's when we're going to have a serious conversation about the fundamentals, like the technical fundamentals of Bitcoin. Until then, if you come up with any proposals, you're gonna be the guy who's trying to kill the goose that lays golden eggs, you know? They're gonna be like, well, it's working. It's getting me rich. I can do this. It's useful. Whatever. Don't spend it. Never sell your Bitcoin, as even Donald Trump told us. So yeah, I do wish you the best of luck. I do wish that you're gonna deploy this and get all the users. But what I see in this Austrian economist, like pseudo-Austrian economist rabbit hole is desolating and depressing, honestly.
Yeah, well, so two things. One, I pushed back my last call an hour because I wanted to keep going with this, but I do have to drop in like 10, 15 minutes. So we won't make it to the 8-hour, record. But
wait, who is it? So I need to apologize to them. Who is it that you canceled the call?
Oh, just some BD conversation on the Alpen side. I don't know if I want to throw out their name, but
okay, no doxing, but Alpen guy, I just want you to know that David is doing a great job and he's really developing the business here, okay? So don't punish him in any way.
Love it. Thank you for that. I'll also have to clip and send that out to the person. But I think your that phrasing that you said, it's like outgrowing your mentors. I actually think I very much resonate with that. I came into Bitcoin through I was an armchair libertarian for like many years, but then I didn't really put the connection of the kind of like philosophical arguments of like free markets and capitalism that I really like cut my teeth on into Bitcoin until like much later. But safety and Bitcoin Standard was like very much a part of that. And now, yes, like I kind of see, I'm like, okay, maybe from like a monetary side, I'm like very much in agreement with this guy, but from like a technical and development, he's just like so far out of his league in my humble opinion. But with that said, it like these conversations aren't like black and white, because I can look at someone like Saifedean and the Austrians and Monetary Max and be like, I am hyper aligned with them on many things. Like I came into this less so from the cypherpunk side and more so from like the monetary argument side. I've become more cypherpunk pilled over the years, but like I very much resonate with the monetary camp. So I don't like completely disavowing these kind of like the monetary maximalist Bitcoin Austrian side, because that is like very near and dear to me. But yeah, when it comes to like the non-monetary stuff, like how platforms can scale and the technology and the kind of like the benefits of zero knowledge and the comparisons of like Lightning Network with Fedimon's, I'm just like, I just think definitively these people have no idea what they're talking about. But I do think that Overton window is it's starting to change, and people are starting to kind of like wake up a little bit more to this. And part of it is because like 5 years ago, it was a scenario where if someone like Paul Storks came on, or sidechains people, or like, people that are kind of like platform maximalists said, hey, like, let me pitch you on this compelling idea for Bitcoin, you would get zero traction, because the more purist camp would just say, well, fork it. Like, if you think it's such a great idea, why don't you fork it and see if like your product is going to succeed in the market? And so the point I'm saying here is, like, the camp that has the leverage in these debates is ultimately the camp where they don't require any sort of change to Bitcoin whatsoever. But after Casey showed that inscriptions were possible and you could embed this arbitrary data, and then BitVM came about, now like the leverage in the debate has kind of switched, where now you have this camp of people, maybe it's like our camp of ZK Rollups versus like the Saifedeans and the monetary maximalists. They used to have the leverage because they would say, well, hey, if your idea is so great, just fork it. Now we're the ones that say, hey, if you don't like our idea, of scaling, you guys fork it. So now it's like the people that have this desire to build these more like cypherpunk solutions, these non-custodial trustless ZK Rollups, like all the stuff we spent the past couple hours building about, like, we are the ones that, in my opinion, have the leverage. And this goes back to the same thing with like the op return debate and Ocean and all those guys. Like, they can sit here and complain until they're blue in the face about how spam is bad and this is what's best for Bitcoin. And we will continue just to get the dopamine hit of arguing with them. But at the end of the day, like, we are in the position of power because the consensus rules support us. It's like, which side does the current existing consensus support? And right now, the consensus, it's a little bit clunky, but it's allowing us to put in data into Bitcoin. It's allowing us to explore things like zero knowledge proofs and rollups and privacy. And so that's why I'm just like, I'm less phased by it. Would I love to see them, like the monetary maximalists, wake up to like all the insanely cool stuff that we're doing on the technical side? Sure. But like, do I need them to wake up to it? No, I don't need their permission. I don't care. I'm doing it. This is what I want.
That's beautiful. I think I'm gonna clip this too and post it for the haters. I think nowadays it's gonna get a lot of attention.
Everybody to hate me.
I'm gonna post this after you go to Las Vegas, maybe.
Cool.
As
yeah,
a short clip. I'm not sure how many people are gonna make it all the way to the end of the episode. We've had more than 1,000 viewers so far, which is beautiful. And if you made it this far into the episode, maybe you should have a magic word that you can post in the comments, just to prove that you're OG, you're legit, you've been listening to this. So what's the word, David?
Alpen, of course.
Alpen?
Yeah.
Okay. Write Alpen and post also a mountain emoji.
I love it.
Or maybe Nepal. I think that's more of an interesting Easter egg. Just type Nepal.
Yes. NEPAL.
Yeah, do that. Thank you very much, David. I feel ashamed right now that I don't have any more questions for you, and I gotta let you go. I'm known for 8-hour interviews. This has only been going for 2.5.
Yeah, well, this one was super fun, Vlad. I think you've been crushing it. Like I said, I don't know if I just wasn't as familiar with the content before, but I feel like you've been on this like rampage over the past like 12 months. And I can feel like you being, I don't know, simultaneously like you want to recapture like a spirit of Bitcoin. You brought on some like amazing guests. So, I'm an avid listener and, keep up all the great work.
Where can people follow you, David?
David_Seroy, S as in Sam, E as in Edward, ROY, on Twitter. And don't hold anything I say on X against me.
Also, don't fight him in Las Vegas. He's a good guy, okay? If you're listening to this, Saifedean, don't get triggered, even though he blocked me on Twitter. So don't choke on your steak. Maybe lower your steak dinner ticket prices a bit. I don't know. Anyway, I'm rambling. Thank you very much, David, and thanks to the sponsors once again: SideShift, Layer 2 Labs, Citrea, Nuances.com, Hodling.ch, and Bitcoin.com news. I'll see you in the next one, and I think it's gonna be about proof of work mining, so stay tuned for that. Bye.